and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and today on the show, someone that I've known for years on the internet, but never had a chance to sit down and talk to. Sohrab Habibion is on the podcast today, and from Kids for Cash to Edsel to Savak to his work with Artro Lindsay, who I think I fuck up his name when I say it the first time on this podcast, to his work with a Rap Central Station, Chuck D's rap magazine, to his unbelievable YouTube page, which I could do a whole episode just talking about his YouTube page with him because, I've watched a lot of those videos over the years. Sohrab has been someone who has been involved in unbelievable amounts of cool culture, and this is a small fraction discussed in this episode of the stuff he's been involved in. But I'm excited for you to hear it, so I'm not going to ramble on too much more. Other than to say, you can go check out rapcentralstation.net to check out his work there. Also go to Habibion at YouTube, at Habibion on YouTube, to check out his crazy video archive of videos he shot back in the day in the mid-'80s in DC. We talk about it in this episode, so you'll know more about that in 1 second. Some notes before we get into the episode. Commander Venus is indeed the band's name. That will make sense when you hear it. I, for some reason, thought Commander Cody. I don't know why. Apologies to Commander Venus for that. Also, Ben Gosling was the guy who came up with the term promoter core, hip to me by a friend of the show, Footnotes co-host, whenever it comes back, Chris O'Toole. Fart Blossom. I've got some note about Fart Blossom that I can't really figure out why I said it, other than check out the records on Fart Blossom as they come out. Pissed Happy Children, Pillsbury Hardcore, the Dane Bramage LP, which we talk about in this episode, the Half Skull compilations, or Empty Skull compilations. And also, I want to say rest in peace to Rick Fröberg. Pick up this book. It's fantastic, a beautiful book and a fitting tribute. It was worked on, Sohrab talks about, with Rich Jacobs. Rest in peace to Rich Jacobs, because an unbelievably important presence in the history of punk and hardcore and culture and art, and just an unbelievable human. Rest in peace to O, who we also talk about briefly in this episode. And rest in peace, of course, to Dave Sweetapple, both fantastic people. And losing all those people around each other, my thoughts and love go out to everyone who knew those people and was involved in their lives, or they were involved in your life. And my thoughts go out to you because they are huge presences that have been lost. So not to end this thing on a down note, but certainly acknowledging the greatness of these people and the loss that the loss of the world that happened when they passed away. Anyway, I'm not going to ramble on anymore. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Sohrab Habibion on Turned Out a Punk. Sohrab, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It's really nice to sort of see your face on the screen and get to hear your voice.
That's right, because when we were corresponding, it was pre-Zoom technology. It was back in the days when it was just text-based on Twitter.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, I think I probably told you this back then. Obviously, fan of all your musical projects. You've had an incredible career, an unbelievable resume. And we're also going to be talking about this Rick Fröberg book that you did too, which is an unbelievable book. But as I told you back then, the Kids for Cash 7-inch is a hugely important record, not just for Toronto, especially for Toronto, but I think, we'll get into it, but there's a lot of historical importance to that band.
That blows my mind.
I think you said that back then too. Well, before we get there, I got to start off the way they all start off, which is, Sohrab, how'd you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across it?
First time I came across it was probably maybe 13 or something like that. And probably heard the Dead Kennedys, and it just didn't sound like anything that I had heard before. And I was immediately drawn to it. And I had never heard music that A, sounded like that, and B, could have lyrics that weren't the normal sort of radio rock and roll kind of stuff. And so it just kind of opened a portal for me where I just thought like, oh wow, this is also an actual legitimate form of expression. It's not just stadium rock, because you hear those Dead Kennedys songs and you hear like, I kill children or let's lynch the landlord or, like I had never heard sentiments like that, whether they were tongue in cheek or not. I just never heard somebody express themselves like that. And I was just totally taken with it.
Those songs in particular, I think that's illustrative of why punk is parody proof, because there's nothing you could make fun of punk saying that punk hasn't said itself in a more extreme way.
Absolutely. I mean, like the first Meatmen record or something, it's like you can't, it's so extreme. And also, at age 13 or whatever, you're kind of vulnerable to these new emotions. And so yeah, I was just really, really taken with it. Also, not even realizing growing up in the DC area what was in my own backyard. So I sort of came to the DC stuff, living in the middle of it, not realizing it was right there. And that was exciting when first time hearing Minor Threat and being like, wait, these guys are from here, from this town. So, yeah.
So what drew you to the Dead Kennedys?
Well, I think the name, the cover art, I mean, again, it was so different. Even, like the most extreme thing I probably had come across prior to that was like, Ozzy Osbourne or Black Sabbath or something like that. But even that, there was something kind of cartoonish, whereas like that Fresh Fruit for Rotten Vegetables cover is just insane, and like you see that as a teenager, and it's really it made a deep impression on me.
Yeah, there's like I guess also at that time too in America, you can't underestimate the weight of a name like the Dead Kennedys.
Absolutely, absolutely. And saying, Butthole Surfers, there were all these names that were just so evocative. Jodie Foster's Army, there were, all these things that were just sort of, there were references to things in our culture, but just kind of squeezing them, twisting them, turning them upside down. And that would just like seem so exciting to me. So yeah. And then not long after that, I was, started Kids for Cash with my high school friends. And that was actually from there's that Dutch band, BGK, and they had a 7-inch, the White Male Dominance, and they had a song on there where it was like uh, a diss song. They were basically riffing on the Exploited, saying that when they saw their audience, all they saw in the kids were cash. Like they didn't actually care about the kids. And that seemed really like a powerful statement to me for one band to be criticizing another band. Like, you don't really respect your audience. You just see them as a source of income. And so we just thought that was a good name for us.
BGK is like a weirdly underrated band for how unbelievable they are.
That Jonestown Aloha record is awesome. And that White Male Dominus, that 7-inch to me still totally holds up.
Yeah, I still have it on my want list. I just have a bootleg. So
Yeah, so like, that's the thing. All those records are so crazy expensive now.
yeah, it really I feel like I got the tail end of affordability. And even then people would be like, oh my God, you're paying $20 for this
I
record?
know, I know. And now it's like 200 or what more.
Yeah, it's crazy. It got nuts very quickly. But going back, were you like you were already into music by the time you found this Dead Kennedy stuff? Was like mainly heavy metal prior to that?
No, actually, I was never a metal kid at all. My dad's Iranian, my mom's American, so we were going back and forth between Iran and New York, and then the revolution happened in Iran, and we were forced to leave, and that's when we moved to the DC area. So that was like 1979, and so as a kid growing up, I was really into like 50s rock and roll, and there were these compilations. I think they were called like "Let the Good Times Roll" or something, and I really loved like early R&B, like 50s R&B and rock and roll. And then also I liked Iranian music. So those were the two things. But the first sort of commercial thing that I ever bought was, do you remember Boney M?
Yes.
Yeah, so there was a cassette of Boney M's "Love for Sale," and I actually got that in Iran. And I don't if when you get a chance to look at the cover art for that, it is bonkers. And the fact that I was able to get that as like a 8-year-old or whatever is really pretty weird. And so that was the most like pop music I had ever heard. And so I actually missed out on a lot of North American pop radio stuff until I moved back in '79 and I had to play catch up really quick, and like kids at the bus stop were like, "Hey man, you like Kiss?" And I was like, "I've never heard of Kiss before," you know. Uh, so Yeah, so I really, and, I started playing clarinet, so I was playing a lot of music on clarinet. So I was listening to like Benny Goodman, and really just not not contemporary music. Um, and so the stuff that I was hearing was stuff that I would hear sort of indiscriminately on the radio or at a friend's house, Pink Floyd or whatever. And yeah, it all sounded fine to me, but it didn't. It just seemed to already exist. Whereas when I heard hardcore, it seemed like it was existing in real time right now in front of me, and that was super exciting.
I think I'm blanking on the name. It's the graphic novel about the Iranian Revolution. It's written
Oh
by,
yeah, 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 by such yeah, she did those two volumes of them, and then they made a movie out of it.
yeah,
Yeah,
It starts with a P. I'm sorry,
Persepolis. That's what. Yeah,
Persepolis. That's it.
Persepolis. Yeah,
Thank you. Um, in that, I think she talks about finding out about new wave and punk in Iran prior to the
yeah.
like. Did you kind of pick up on that stuff when you were living over there at that time, or I guess it's really early
No,
'79?
yeah. When we left in '79, but I remember later in Maximum Rock and Roll seeing scene reports, and occasionally you'd get like a scene report from Tehran or something like that. I remember thinking like, wow, that is incredible. But that's the thing that I think is really appealing about punk rock is that it can exist in these little microcosms all around the globe, and yeah, and it's sort of it's available to everybody, which is what I think why I never actually related to like the Pink Floyds and all those because like that just seemed like it was a bigger. It didn't seem like real people made by real people. It was like potato chips or something. It just sort of was made for you and is out in the world. Whereas like the punk stuff just seemed like you could relate to the people making it, the process of how you make. Like all the rules were kind of tossed to the side. And so I was like, hey, man, your thing is as good as anybody else's. So, and who doesn't want to hear that?
Yeah, especially with music, and I think it's probably growing up in Canada, getting sort of like the North American kind of like version of pop culture, like international music. It's like, oh, that's world music. It's just like it fits all into one category.
Yes.
Whereas, like when you find punk, like you're saying, like you're reading Max and Rock and Roll, and you're like, oh, all these bands are equal, and it doesn't matter
Yeah.
where you're from. There's like it's sort of like this free exchange of culture, which doesn't really happen certainly in Canada in a lot of music cultures that I've kind of witnessed. Or like with other music from other places having the exact same weight, if not more weight placed on it than the local music that you're hearing.
Also, I think that there was, particularly in that sort of early, I think there was such the vocabulary for what is hardcore, what is punk was so broad, so you'd have like the inbred, or you'd have like, the rhythm pigs, and stuff that, or even the Minutemen. I mean, the Minutemen, it's not really hardcore if by like the Minutemen don't sound like, uh, 4 minute warning or whatever, it's like it's not, but, and yet it's all part of the same thing, which I really love that. I love how kind of broad and open it was. And as a kid, it really turned me on to so many different ideas, um, and also just made me aware of other places in the world, being pen pals with bands from Australia. And there was a woman in Poland that I used to swap tapes with. And it just sort of opened me up to all this stuff that I just was not aware of. And so it was constantly a new source of information and excitement and connecting with people,
Yeah, like do you know that record label Tiananmen '89?
No, no.
It's a guy who used to write the column in Max and Rock and Roll. It's a French guy, and I guess he worked for like an NGO traveling the world to different countries. And when he'd arrive somewhere, he'd be like, "Where's the local punk scene?" He'd find the local punk scene, leave copies of Max and Rock and Roll, and just take tapes from anyone and everyone. And then he would put out these sort of like, well, I've got a bunch of them here, like these compilations of like
Oh, that's
local
awesome.
music. And this one's got Albania, Jordan, Madagascar, and Reunion Island. And
That's so great.
that's where I first heard Iranian punk music, and it's the first place I've ever heard, well, certainly Madagascar punk music,
Yeah.
Madagascarian punk music, I guess. And
Yeah, I mean, who knew, right?
yeah, but like you're saying, that's the thing that like is so powerful about this music is because you don't need skill, you don't need all these sorts of traditional things that keep barriers of entry to people and young people
Yeah.
especially. And that I love that. Like this was something that could become truly global because you didn't necessarily need the best resources to afford the most high-tech version of the gear. You could just use whatever you had.
Whatever you could record on there, it was legit. you
Yeah.
know, like your boombox practice recording, just put it out, whatever, it's fine.
I think on the Alarm demo, they're playing drums on a chair. So,
Yeah, I mean, actually, speaking of Canada, I remember I used to correspond with, I think it was the younger brother of the guitar player from Sons of Ishmael. And so, like, we swapped the Kids for Cash 7 inch for the Sons of Ishmael 7 inch. And, like, but, we'd have this regular correspondence where he'd let me know what was happening in, in Ontario scene or whatever. And, like, I'd be like, all right, well, Marginal has a new record coming out. And, and it was fun. It was great. Like, it was a nice way of feeling like you were connected to something bigger than yourself.
yeah. And it's also, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day where there's no, there's nothing to gain from this. Like you're doing it because you love this culture and you want to meet people from other places. Like there's no social capital. Like it's not necessarily happening publicly because no one would understand it. So you're just
No, no.
doing it.
Yeah, and explaining it at like family gatherings, like, oh, I play in a band called Kids for Cash, and yeah, I'm talking to this guy in a band called Fucked Up. You know what I mean? It's like it doesn't really, it's just a lot of raised eyebrows, which is kind of, I think, I don't want to say part of the appeal, but it sort of, I think, in a nice way, it keeps it very democratic because it's for everybody, but not everybody is interested in it.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, and I don't know. I just that level of correspondence too, and you could really like you could be pen pals with anybody from anywhere in the world. And I still am friends with some of the people that I used to write with when I was 15.
It's like, it's so different than any other social structure I certainly have encountered in life where success, in particular financial success, is not necessarily a benefit. Like I feel like there are certainly advantages to having that, but I think it certainly doesn't buy you more social capital in the same way that it does in a lot of other places that I found myself over time.
In fact, it's kind of within it, it's almost like a hindrance, right?
Yeah, 100% exactly. Yeah.
But it's funny because I also, I mean, part of it I felt like was growing up in the DC area and having Discord as a model for how you're a band, how you kind of conduct your business as a band. When I was in the 90s, I was in a band called Edsel, and we started to participate in kind of the larger music world, the more whatever professional capitalistic music world. And at first it was I don't want to say confusing to us, but like we weren't familiar with what all that stuff was. Like we didn't know about CMJ and about all college radio. We didn't know about all this stuff that we'd meet other bands on tour and they're like, oh yeah, is your new record going to be, are you servicing CMJ? And I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so it was a funny way to be introduced to this other part of the music world. But later, whatever, we participated in it, and for better or for worse. We felt in a nice way, it felt really naive and sort of kind of idealistic because it was like, no, man, we're just in a band. We're doing this thing, you know.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like it goes on for forever, right? Like it's so, and I'm sure you weren't thinking this at the time, but like this music that's made by teenagers, in some cases sells for thousands of dollars now, right? Like it's people are still talking about these 7 inches
Yeah,
decades removed.
yeah. Like the SOA 7 inch. I think those guys were like 13, 14 or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so that part of it's funny when yeah, when the part of the thing that you did as a teenager, which was so distinctively a thing unto itself, then later has this other kind of value to it. It's a hard thing to kind of wrap. For me, it's a hard thing for me to wrap my head around because the two don't quite square.
So what was the first show you went to? Or like live music period?
Um, a friend of mine's older sister took us. I'm sure you played the 930 Club in
Yeah.
DC. So did you play the old 930 Club probably?
Actually, you know what? I've never played it. I only did a live podcast at the 930 Club. I've
Oh,
never,
really? Oh, wow.
yeah.
Okay. So there was the old one, which was not that far from where the new one is, but it was a much smaller place. And they used to have like a three bands, $3 night. And a friend of mine's older sister took us to that. And it's funny. one of the bands made a real impression on me. They were called Age of Consent, and they were sort of a, I don't know, a new wavy power pop band. But they played with a real intensity, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'd never heard music sort of at that proximity before, where you feel the air coming off the kick drum and like the guitar amp is like right in your face. And so that was another thing that was exciting. And that was not punk music, but it was just feeling that, you're in a room with people and there's like a certain energy and vibrancy to like the space. And then I started going to shows pretty quickly after that. The first like hardcore show I went to was, I think, Circle Jerks, COC, Marginal Man. And that was that was completely mind blowing. I was like, I guess 15 at the time. And COC, that was when they were a three-piece. And Mike Dean was just like, his intensity was so incredible. And it's funny because they were, again, I was not a metal kid, but the guitar playing is a little metally. But it was the way he did it was didn't seem corny the way a lot of metal stuff it can be to me. And so I was like, this is really interesting. And so afterwards, I went up to the guitar player and I was like, man, Woody, I think his name was. I was like, how do you, that sound is incredible. What do you do? And he was like, get a guitar and an amp, you play with your friends. I was like, oh, okay, you know. But and that was the thing. Like, I really sort of felt like, yeah, it really is that simple, And also seeing those bands like COC and even Circle Jerks, they looked like normal people. They weren't. There was no costuming involved. There was no like Mohican and And so I like the fact that the people making the music were there to make the music, and it wasn't like uh, uh, I don't know. The theatrics were like built into the music. They didn't have to. The performative element wasn't in the costuming, and that made me feel like I could do it as well. Because my tendency is not to dress in a flamboyant way or whatever. And so that to me was like, oh, okay, I could do this.
Did you notice a stark contrast in the audiences between the two shows, between that 9:30 Club show and this one?
Yes, yeah, definitely the three bands, $3 was more like, like college kids, high school kids, sort of like, very normal looking kids. Whereas at the COC Circle Jerks show, I had never seen skinheads before. So that was one thing that was pretty crazy. It was like, because at that time in DC, the skinhead scene was pretty rough. So seeing skinheads for the first time, seeing a pit for the first time, uh, and then yeah, there were kids with mohawks, and like it was definitely, it felt more like, oh, this is how it's depicted on television, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny because like I guess it goes right back to like 81. There's almost like two parallel scenes that happen in DC where there's like that, I guess, the Limp Records and descendants of Limp Records, kind of Dolphin Records, kind of like you said, power poppy, new wavy kind of world. And then there's DC hardcore. And
yeah,
they seem very, at times, there's like it seems like there's a bit of an aggression between the two scenes, but like very distinct at least.
yeah, but interestingly, later there would be a crossover. So Skip, who ran Limp, ran Yesterday and Today Records, and all the DC hardcore guys worked at Yesterday and Today. And then Ted Nicely, who was the bass player in the Raz, who were on Limp, he ended up, of course, producing a bunch of the DC, Fugazi and Shudder to Think, Jawbox. And he also worked at Yesterday and Today Records. So it was they were sort of the older guys, that the Limp record scene, and I think they actually, I mean, you'd have to ask Ian to confirm this, but I think they sort of helped. I think Skip probably helped usher in like how you get a record pressed, how you do these things, and that was what I thought was really neat about the. I mean, I'm sure it happens everywhere, but my experience with DC was that somebody there was always willing to help you and willing to say like, hey, if you want to do this, this is how you do it. It's like you may not be familiar with how to do it because you haven't done it before, but somebody is willing to like hold your hand or point you in the right direction. And I really appreciated that. I learned a lot from it.
It's also interesting that I've noticed, and this is, maybe not your experience living there and me being very far away, but there always seems to be two parallel scenes happening in DC in terms of punk and hardcore. Like certainly throughout the 90s where there's like the Discord and Discord adjacent scene, and then there's Battery and Damnation AD and these sort of like younger hardcore bands. And from people I've talked to are like, yeah, they were very distinct kind of separate worlds then too.
but there was also crossover. So like, but the Edsel, we recorded with Ken, who was in Battery and those bands. He had a studio up in College Park, I think, and we went and recorded there. And um, so yeah, and there was, I don't know, there was, I think it may have seemed more separate outside. There was a lot. I mean, for example, like when Edsel was around, Discord was active, Teen Beat was active, Simple Machines was active. You know, there was a bunch of labels. Slumberland was active. There were all these labels, and even though like a record on Slumberland would definitely not sound like a record on Discord, you know, like whatever Hoover did not sound like Velocity Girl, but you wouldn't be surprised if these people were housemates, you know, and going to the same shows together. And that was another thing that I thought was really nice about DC at that time was that, you know, there was everybody was very friendly to one another and very supportive, even if the thing that you were doing was different from the thing that your housemate was doing, you know.
Well, going back to, I guess, before the Revolutionary Summer, you brought up the skinheads. Did you have any interactions with Lefty and that
I
crew?
did. I had a couple of unfortunate interactions with Lefty. One was I was with a friend of mine who grew up in South Africa, and we were at this record store called Smash, and he was wearing a Union Jack T-shirt, and her, you know, her famous weapon was an 8 ball and a sock. Which is definitely you do not want to be on the receiving end of that. And so he and I were like flipping through the bins at Smash, and she comes in and sees his shirt, and she's like, you know, what's up with that? And he's like, oh, you know, I grew up in South Africa. And I think she thought that he was messing with her. And so basically she just immediately wanted to get into it with us, you know, and I had to be like, no, 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 no. He's for real, you know. And so somehow we talked our way out of it. And then another time at a show at 930 Old 930 Club, I think it was actually Youth Brigade, the California Youth Brigade were playing, and we came out, and there was a big group of skinheads just like looking for trouble. And Lefty was there, and she sort of had her like minions with her. And for some reason, they targeted another friend of mine and I, and you know, they were like, "Well, you know, what are you guys doing?" We're like, "Going home," you know, and they surrounded us, which was a pretty frightening thing. And then one of the skinheads, amazingly, I don't know what came over him, but he walked up to me and he's like, I've seen you at shows. I was like, yeah. He's like, then he kind of turns around, everybody's like, he's cool, man. He goes to shows. And I was like, all right, we're out of here. You know, but it was really that there was a moment where I was like, wow, we're gonna die tonight.
Was it was it any show kind of this could happen at, or was it
Yeah,
certain shows where it was?
no, it'd be any random show. I mean, I just think they were like, whatever, you know, they're like teenagers, early 20s, probably at the oldest. They're just hooligans looking to, you know, looking to have a rough, fun tumble night, whatever, you know.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
interesting though how the impact Lefty had. Like so many people that come on this show, like had run-ins or knew Lefty, and then I've when you think about the effect and where it ultimately leads, where all these people are kind of getting out of hardcore at that point because it's getting ridiculous with this violence, she kind of leads to Revolution Summer, which I think ultimately shifts everything forever in punk and hardcore. Like that's where politics kind of really get married to punk and hardcore.
it felt the Revolution Summer thing was interesting because it really felt like people were trying to take something back. You know, like it had gone too far and become violent and just became an unpleasant environment. You know, like who wants to go to a show and fear for your safety? Like that's not what you're looking for, you know? And so I remember going to see, I think it was Scream and Kingface, maybe Dag Nasty, Georgetown University, and the pit just got really gnarly. And it was, I think Scream was playing, and Mark Sullivan, the singer from Kingface, he just came into the middle of the pit and just sat down. And I happened to be next to him, so I was like, okay. So I sat down, and then a bunch of people just started sitting down, essentially blockading the pit. And it felt really powerful. Like, oh no, 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 we don't have to suffer these people's weird take on what you're, you know, this is like weird reenactment behavior that they're involved in, because the thing too is like, if you really love music and you're there to see the bands, nothing is more distracting than some dude bumping into you, and it also just yeah, it felt like a very nice positive evolution of like, this can be a positive thing. We don't have to be the recipients of an environment that, you know, we helped make and then we're no longer welcome.
Yeah.
Um,
It almost becomes a doctrine that unconsciously or maybe consciously spreads throughout, I guess, the world when people are dealing with scenes that have gone too far, and the idea of taking it back and sort of weaponizing softer music or more emotional music in a way that makes it alienating to these people. Like they wouldn't like this kind of music. They wouldn't be here. And I
yeah.
think it's amazing how you see this cycle kind of repeat time and time again in different scenes. Like to this day, I'm sure it repeats like this.
I think the nice thing about it is that ultimately, if you're talking about a thoughtful group of people who are trying to confront something that they feel that they can make better, with just that little bit of extra focus and energy and attention, you actually can do it. And so I think that's a really nice thing to be able to keep in mind. Because I think a lot of times social groups, the larger they get, the more fractured they are, and the more, different agendas come into play, and yeah, but you can be in control of it. You can say like, no, we don't want that. We don't, like we're not interested in that. But also, I think at that time it was interesting because, like, remember those early Fugazi shows? They were small. They were really, really small shows. And I've never asked Ian about it, but, I imagine part of it was on purpose. Like, I never saw Minor Threat. That was before my time. But, you see the videos of them and stuff, and those shows were pretty nutso. And I'm sure for him at a certain point, I guess with Embrace too, but, just trying to, again, just make it smaller, just sort of make it more about kind of the core idea of why you're doing it. And I think that I've never been in a situation where I've been like, oh, I'm gonna make it smaller. but I imagine that uh it it requires us, because most people want their thing to be bigger, right? Everybody's like, oh, it's got to grow, it's got to be bigger. And I really like the fact that there are people like Ian who are like, it doesn't have to be bigger. It can be this, and that's a very appealing outlook to me.
Yeah, like I find that whole story of them maturing as this group of guys that brought the type of hardcore to the East Coast. Like I think they own that in that America's Hardcore documentary, or at least Rollins does. Um, that and then here they are, like you said, realizing it's gone too far, and how do we pivot and correct, and sort of this idea, like you're like I feel it's like a rejection of the commercialization of punk too. Like you're saying, it doesn't have to be bigger. It can be smaller. It can be just a bunch of people in a coffee shop watching a band play, and it's still valid and just as valid as hundreds of people in the Olympic Auditorium watching a
Right.
band play. And so I find it so fascinating that over the course of the whatever it becomes a genre at a certain point, I guess, right? Like emo, and
Right.
it becomes a complete inverse of itself, where all this stuff that's from the beginning of it, like this sort of anti-commercial, um, trying to be anti-misogynist, like a bunch of previously kind of misogynist dudes being like, no, let's
Yeah.
see women and let's bring them in, right? Like, and then it becomes this complete monstrosity under the, I guess not the same name because no one wanted that name, but like at least kind of
Yeah.
claiming that legacy.
It's like emo under new management, like
Yeah, exactly.
uh yeah, it is a funny thing. I mean, I think I think did Brian Baker coin the emo thing?
He claims he saw Rites of Spring and he's like, what's with this emo core shit?
I mean, he's a really funny guy. So
Very.
if he wants to take credit, I give him full credit. And I could imagine him saying it in that kind of sarcastic way. But yeah, I think at that time, um, before the word was coined, or before that, uh, it really was just a way, as you were saying, getting away from that masculinity, getting away from that sort of like jockish, thuggish behavior that I think hardcore sort of became, sadly. And Yeah, I mean, seeing Rites of Spring, that was a pretty pretty amazing experience in a tiny little cafe, Uh, and as again, I think I was 16 at the time, and that really just like moved some molecules around for me.
I've always heard that like it's your guys' wave of bands that almost inspires this whole comeback, like Lunch Meat, Mission Impossible, Kids for Cash, like that wave of bands being the younger kids that were coming in with this positive attitude, and sort of these older punks for I guess other reasons too, but like seeing that and responding to that energy and do like
I mean, I
do
know that.
go
Oh,
on.
sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say, I know that. Like, I think Scott's guitar playing in Lunch Meat and Soulside, I think, was a huge influence on like early Fugazi and stuff. I mean, I hear it at least like those octaves and stuff that Scott would do. Like, he was the first one that I heard in our DC area to sort of employ that in that way. But yeah, it was like the next generation, right? Like all the younger siblings were starting to do stuff, and I think that's really cool. And the older siblings are like, "Man, this is pretty dope," you know. Uh, and but they had also shared all their stuff with us, so like and that was the thing going to Yesterday and Today Records, and you'd go there and it would be like Michael Hampton, Guy, Brendan, Bert Kiros, and all these people were working there. And, it was a musical education. You'd go there with like, have $20. And, Guy would be like, all right, let's go to the 7-inch room. Like they had a separate store that was all 7 inches. And he's like, do you have this stiff little finger 7? No. Do you have this Empire 7-inch? No. And it's just sort of like, in a really lovely way, just sort of schooling me on the music that, made him make the music that excited me to make music, and sort of helping connect the dots. And so it's cool that then later the younger generation was reconnecting dots for those guys. Because there's then, you get to a certain age where you end up being peers, even though, you're still a generation younger, but you're together,
Yeah, eventually you spend enough time together where the 5 years which meant the whole world at another
Right.
time doesn't mean anything
It
anymore.
doesn't, yeah, yeah. It's all wiped out. Yeah.
How did Kids for Cash come together?
I mean, we all went to the same high school, and then I don't actually remember the how we started, but Frank, our singer, his parents were Lebanese Christians and very, very religious, and so they never knew he was in a band. So he was always studying at the library or something like that whenever we were practicing, or coming over to my house to spend the night if we had a show or something like that. And but he would order records like nobody's business. He was like, remember Systematic Mail Order out of San Francisco?
I've
So
seen
he,
ads for sure. Yeah.
yeah, so he'd get the systematic catalog and he'd like go through and I don't know by today's numbers what it would be, but at the time it seemed like a lot of money he was spending on records. But because of his parents' very, very Christian background, the records could not go to his house. So they would all come to me and I would get to tape them all and sort of hold on to them. And then finally he would take them and squirrel them away like under the ping pong table in his parents' basement. But it was great. That too was a big musical education for me, like, getting the Let There Be Jelly Beans compilation. And with Systematic, I think if you bought $50 worth of records, they would send you a free record. So part of the deal was I got to keep the free record. So that was also a good deal for me. But that was like the first Camper Van Beethoven record, that one that's on Independent Project. That was the free record for one of those. And again, like I had never heard, because at that point I was like so deep into hardcore. And I was like, what is this Camper Van Beethoven band? But I listened to it enough times and I was like, this is pretty cool, And that actually ended up turning me on to other more kind of jangly music that I got more into later. But like I didn't know about bands from New Zealand or whatever at that time. And so, but hearing stuff like that early Camper Beethoven, was a neat sort of ear awakening.
In the wake of the recent Gerard Cosloy dude from Cracker Beef, um,
Oh, I'm not aware of that.
they got in a huge fight on Twitter.
Really?
Yeah, over Maximum Rock and Roll, which also
Wow,
makes
that
it.
sounds rich.
Yeah, so it led me down a path of looking into Camper Van Beethoven. That first record's like close to $500 now.
Oh,
It's like
well,
crazy. Like
it's right here.
it's a great record, but
Yeah.
I think you got a good free record that day.
Well, also the cover again, like I had never that independent product that Bruce Lichter. I mean, I had never seen printing like that, and so that stuff like that. So my arguably day job is a graphic designer, and punk rock also completely informed that. Having to make your own record covers and seeing how other people did it, and in DC, Jeff Nelson's designs were incredible, and there was this other guy, Peter Hayes, who was an awesome designer, and then seeing like the independent project those records and what they looked like. And yeah, it was or just like a lot of British stuff, like all those Buzzcocks singles. The designs are amazing. So yeah, it was definitely, it opened me up to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, like I think it's funny. Shepard Ferry was just on the podcast, and we talked a lot about like the graphics in punk and sort of the you can't think of too many other genres. Like obviously people that are into design and into artwork can name these artists, but like where the record cover artist becomes a superstar within the
Yeah,
genre, like on
like
par with the band.
Pusshead. Like,
Exactly.
I
Pusshead,
mean, Pushead's records, they were instantly recognizable. Like
yeah, Petty
actually
Bond,
Brian Walsby too.
Brian Walsby, Mad Mark Rude.
Yeah,
There's oh man, I'm leaving people off, and I don't mean to be disrespectful in doing that, but there are a number of these artists that like
Sean
became
Taggart,
famous.
who did like
Yeah,
the New York hardcore stuff. Yeah,
and it's amazing how like, and it's also film, it's also fashion, like food too, like all the people that opened vegan restaurants in the wake of this, but it
yeah,
just was this permission to do whatever the fuck you wanted.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, just take a risk, which is really, really cool. One thing you had asked how Kids for Cash got together. One thing that I think is sort of worth mentioning is that so we were just a high school hardcore band from the Virginia suburbs of DC, and we were going to see other bands play, going to 930 Club, DC Space, various places where there were hardcore shows. They would do shows in like Hung Jury Pub, which was a bar in downtown DC, but on the weekends it would open it up to hardcore shows. It was like an after work bar in DC, and places like the Complex, which were like I think that was like more of like a gay dance bar, but again they would open it up to hardcore shows on the weekends and stuff. But we had no idea how to play a show outside of within our friend group, and so like I didn't know. I was like, do you call the 930 Club? Who do you ask for? I just didn't know how it worked. And so I remember talking to my mom about it. I was like, yeah, I was like, we'd really love to go and play, but like I don't know what to do. And she was like, well, there's a local community center here where we are. Why don't you rent that out and you can do your own shows? And so my mom was totally like the DIY, And so we ended up doing a ton of shows there, and we'd call Discord House and say like, hey, would Marginal Man come and play? Would Scream? Would Beefeater come and play? And so we ended up bringing the bands to us because we didn't know how to go the other direction. And then the real coup was one time we got 7 seconds to play, and that was like that was our big moment. We're like, I can't believe 7 seconds is playing.
That's awesome. I ran into our mutual friend Nick Sewell last night at a movie
Yes.
premiere, and he hit me to the fact that you maybe weren't behind this, but at least had the archive of all those amazing videos of all the DC area bands playing, and it's like the same venue, and it's almost like the same angle for a lot of the shows.
Yeah,
But
that was a lot of those are at the community center, and then, so basically, again, shout out to my mom. Her grandmother when she died had some paltry sum of money left over, and so gave it to her. And my mom was like, "Oh, I want to give a little bit to you. Do you want She wanted to get me something, and she was like, "How about if at that point the Sony Betacam had just come out." And she's like, why don't I get you that? And then you guys can videotape your bands playing. And I was like, I don't know, man. Like I was just kind of like, I was really not interested, but my mom was super cool and I didn't want to be rude. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so she got it. And basically, as an act of trying to be, an appreciative son, I was like, all right, I guess I'll videotape the show. And essentially then I was like, actually, this is kind of fun. And then so started taping other shows. Like would go see, different venues, DC Space and some places at Georgetown University that have shows and various community centers, and would just videotape them. And honestly did not think anything of it. It was just kind of a fun thing to do. And then occasionally I would make, like I mean, I'd make them for the bands or whatever. Like I remember at some point I had like 3 or 4 Gray Matter recordings. And so Steve Niles, the bass player, was like, "Hey, is there any way we could get copies of that?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." So, but that was it. I never actually touched them until the pandemic came along. And, Scott Crawford, who did Salad Days, and so he was like, you should digitize these. And he said that he told me that Dave Grohl has a production company, and I guess they were doing that HBO series at the time where they go into different studios.
Yeah.
And so they actually wanted some of the footage that I had. And Scott was like, you should ask them if they would be willing to digitize everything. And I was a little sheepish about it because it seemed like kind of a heavy ask. But I was like, all right. So I emailed and I was like, I've got all these tapes. You have the resources. Is there any way you'd be willing to help out? They wrote back right away. They're like, absolutely. Here's our FedEx number. Put them in a box, send them to us with a hard drive. And they digitized all the stuff for me and sent it back, which was pretty amazing. And then in the pandemic, obviously, we all had a little extra time at home. And so I just started going through and editing them and just putting them up online. So,
It's, well, thanks to your mom for this. But
yeah,
there's some bands that there's no other live recordings of at all.
maybe not. I don't know. I mean, well, I'm trying to think.
The
Maybe.
Dane Bramage
Oh,
recording
yeah.
is the only,
The Dave, yeah.
because I'm a huge Dane Bramage fan. I would
They
argue
were
that that's,
so good.
I think that's maybe one of Dave Grohl's best bands. Like I think that I like it more than a lot of stuff that I probably should rate higher, but I just think that record's fucking amazing.
It's a great record. And that guy, Ruben, who's, by the way, he's an incredible photographer, the guitar player, singer in that band. But he had such a cool guitar sound, really cool voice. And it was just like to me later when I heard Early Screaming Trees, I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of Dane Bramage. But I mean, I think at that time they were doing something that had not yet really been tapped into.
Yeah, a phenomenal band. And Dave Grohl drummed in Kids for Cash too for a brief period, right?
Very briefly, yeah. So our drummer went to college, and we had not yet gotten another drummer. And when he was in Mission Impossible and Kids for Cash would play together. And then his mom and my mom became friendly, and so we would hang out a bunch. And so I was like, "Hey, Dave, we got this show coming up." And so he played a couple shows with us, actually including the 7 Seconds show. Which the funny thing about that was, so it's a community center show. So it started at like, I don't know, say 6 p.m. It was still light outside. So our friends band PMS played, and then we played. 7 Seconds hadn't shown up yet. And then so they show up and we're like, hey, great, it's all ready for you to go. And so they play, and it's probably like 7:30 when they're done or something, 8 o'clock. And we had the place till 9 or something. And like, all right, well, that was cool. And Kevin Seconds was like, well, aren't you guys going to play? And I was like, oh, we already played. He's like, well, it's time. You guys should totally play. And so basically, we played again after 7 seconds. And Dave was playing drums with us. And I just remember we're playing, and literally all of 7 seconds is just like staring at this kid, like, what kind of maniac is this on the drums, So that was a pretty fun evening. It wasn't a night, it was an evening.
That Dane Bramage video is amazing because it's not mixed like that LP, so those drums are so fucking loud.
He was a pounder, man. I mean, honestly, it was. And the thing that I remember was nuts was I remember the first time going and spending the night at his house, and he was like, "Hey, let's jam." And he had a guitar, and I didn't know he played guitar. I just thought he was a great drummer. And so he's like, "Yeah, I was working on this song. We should totally jam out on it or whatever." And I was like, "Oh my God, this guy's a really good guitar player too." I was like, "What?" It kind of, I was like, "Oh, he's one of those guys. He can play anything," you know.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
there's that song on that Simple Machines box set that he did, Neapolitan, I think it was the.
And that first tape was on Simple Machines, the one where he
Yeah,
played everything.
that's right. Yeah.
Um,
It's so
yeah,
funny. It's so funny how like Dave has that connection to like Simple Machines on in DC, and then Kurt's got that connection to K Records
right.
in Olympia, and it's almost like they're parallel labels weirdly with each other
Totally.
too.
Yeah. There's like they're each other's sort of like East Coast, West Coast spirits.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like same sort of like I don't even know what type of music you'd call it, like punk indie, I guess, but it's like it's very distinct kind of sound that both were
Yeah.
dancing
Yeah.
around.
No, it's true. It's true. But yeah, at that time, honestly, as I said before, like there was just such a great mix of, you know, the sounds might be different, but the people were very sort of integrated in terms of, community.
So, like, as this stuff is kind of happening, were there skinheads that you would see that had previously been sort of antagonists that were crossing over, or is it just completely separate?
That's interesting. I just remember them kind of disappearing at a certain point. I mean, it would be really curious. It would be great if you could somehow track them and see who they became. Because I really don't know. I just remember at a certain point, it's like they just weren't there anymore.
We played
It
a
was like
show.
the mosquitoes are gone, the picnic's fun again, like
We played a show years ago with the Cro-Mags. At that time, what was the Cro-Mags? Um, and Gut Instinct did a reunion show
wow.
before the Cro-Mags set, and I think a lot of them came out for that show. A lot of the old guard, from what people were
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah. And were they all dressed up?
They look very normal now. All like grown out their hair. I don't know if the Fred Perry shirts fit quite
Right,
as
right,
well at
right.
this point.
The
So
boots and braces weren't there.
yeah, but they definitely. I still would not want to mess with them. I definitely have
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
impression.
Yeah, I'm sure the muscle memory is there if they need to tap into it.
Yeah, I think someone told me that one had gone on to become a special forces soldier, and they were.
I wouldn't be surprised if January 6th that it was well represented.
Yeah, it's kind of tragic too with Lefty. There was a someone I found online that was detailing how Lefty passed away because she passed away recently, like a couple years ago.
I didn't know that.
And the thing I read was one of the person who was holding her hand when she passed away was a woman who she had previously like slashed with a razor blade at a show,
Wow.
who had met her as adults sort of towards the end of Lefty's life and become friends and was with her in the hospice when she passed. So
Wow.
yeah, really, like you're saying, it's like such a unpleasant way to go through life that like there's only so many ways you can go with that. Like you're gonna live in that aggression and probably die in that aggression, or hopefully find some sort of peace beforehand.
Yeah. I mean, it really makes me wonder like what sort of childhood they had that this is, their evolution was to end up there. Well, hopefully that's not where they ended up. Hopefully they evolve into something better. But it is at whatever junction you are in your life where you look in the mirror and you're a skinhead and I cannot imagine what that feeling is like.
Yeah,
But I think part of it is like there's a cultish element to it too, right? It's like trying to instill this pride and and things where it's really, I think, kind of taking advantage of people's vulnerabilities, whether it's intended or not. But it's like you're creating this, and I think the army does the same thing. Any sort of like where you're creating a force, just manipulating people's vulnerabilities to your advantage.
yeah. I think the 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 family structure that
Right?
punk and hardcore kind of offers people, and
Yeah.
the amount of people that are coming here from, not that I was like in a dire family situation, but I was in a like a weird family situation when I found punk and hardcore, and like that's the great thing about it. But like you're saying, that could also be the terrible thing about it, and I'm sure that what draws some people to military service is also looking for that structure and that sort of
Right, the thing that's lacking, you need or you want. But also, yeah, I think that I think anything where that sort of says to like misfits that hey, it's we've got room for you,
yeah.
and that's it can be a positive thing, or I guess it can be manipulated in a way as well. But I think that yeah, the outsider, the misfit, the other, and but that's honestly, when I moved here from Iran, I definitely felt like an other, and so I think that's when I heard hardcore, I was like, oh, okay, like there's an other there as well, you
Yeah.
know.
Um,
Uh,
the reason, obviously, I said that your 7 inch was so important to Toronto is because we are, my band and a bunch of bands are here, are part of this sort of wave of town of hardcore bands, which was the name of a zine,
no
which,
way,
yeah, which was named after your record label.
no,
Yeah.
you are kidding me.
Yeah. Fat Steve Wiltsey, who sang in the band Our War, was a huge Kids for Cash fan. He was the guy who turned all of us onto it. And
That is insane.
yeah, Town of Hardcore is the name of his, which was he was the first to be like, yeah, I got it off the Kids for Cash 7 inch.
Oh man. So I mean, we came up with that. We were joking because we were in our little rinky-dink suburb was called Burke, and we would joke like, "Yeah, Burke, town of hardcore." That was that. That's so amazing. Wow, I gotta find that zine.
Oh, I
Is
can
there
I
any?
I can send you copies.
Oh, I would love that.
There's a Town of Hardcore comp 7-inch compilation that a bunch of us are on, and
Oh man, that's so cool.
they did a book of them of all the issues, and I wrote the intro to the book too. But that definitely the legacy of Kids for Cash looms large in the T dot.
Oh man, that is something. Oh God, I cannot wait to tell the other guys about that.
Um, you guys are also on the incredible Son of Quincy tape.
That's a great compilation.
A crazy good compilation. What a weird mix of awesome bands.
Yeah, I love the cover art on that too. That bright yellow with the illustration.
It
Yeah.
is. It was that just like through sending out tapes that kind of happened, like you're talking about tape trading.
That was MRR, man. That was the beauty of MRR. Like we sent our 7-inch to MRR, it got reviewed, and then people started writing. And essentially, a couple different people wrote and were like, "Hey, we'd love to have a song for a compilation," and that was one of them. And I was like, "Okay, sounds good." Is Cancerous Growth on there?
Cancerous Growth, Scared Straight, which is Brian
Yes,
Walsby,
yes.
Scott Radinsky, future baseball star. Um, Active
Really?
Ingredients.
Wait, the guy from Scared Straight was a baseball star?
Yeah, Scott Radinsky became a pitcher for California Angels, for um, Cleveland, and he became a pitching coach for a while as well. And
Wow,
yeah,
that's so crazy.
they Scared Straight. Brian Walsby left the band, of course, and became Brian Walsby, and or was Brian Walsby the whole time. But the rest of them became 10-foot pole, and then eventually Scott quit and did pulley, and was also playing baseball the whole time. So
Amazing.
and also 7 Seconds are on it, and our I guess my country mates and your friends, Sons of Ishmael, are on there as
Yeah.
well. Also, Anti Scene,
Oh, right.
a rare intersection of that,
That's
and
true.
Subculture as well from North Carolina,
That
and
subculture record was so good.
so
Was that
good.
is that on Fart Blossom or
It
who put that
is
out?
Fart
Okay, Dane
Blossom.
Bramage, right? Dane
Yep.
Bramage was on Fart Blossom. And what was there was a band from Denver that was on Fart Blossom that was really cool. What was her name? Anyway,
Uh,
sorry.
no, because I'm running through. Fart Blossom is one of those labels that I'm weirdly obsessed with. Public Display, were they from Denver?
No,
Brave New
no,
World. Brave New World had a song called Barriers. That's like one of the great.
that might be the band is Brave New World. They might have been the Denver band.
Yeah, that 7-inch is fucking amazing. No one talks about that record ever, so I'm glad we can talk about it. But yes, that song Barriers on that 7-inch is one of my favorite hardcore songs
Oh man.
ever. And yeah, Fart Blossom is one of those labels that you go through it, you're like, damn, a lot of music history on Fart Blossom records.
Fart Blossom Enterprises, right?
Sorry, exactly. Correction.
Which is just so hilarious.
Yeah, they also did Pissed Happy Children. The pre Man is a Bastard band was on there as
Oh, I
well.
didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I think is such a great thing about this era. Like you're saying, there's like as much as there's great music like this in DC, it seems like every city had this explosion of just DIY punk bands.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I just like, again, you could record, like, I think the Kids for Cash, our first tape, just on my 4-track cassette that we made it. Sounded fine, sounded appropriate, sounded like we sounded,
So
scrappy.
there's a demo tape before the 7-inch?
Yes. Yeah. I actually, to be honest, I prefer that tape to the 7-inch because the recording, there's something kind of cool and murky about the recording that I actually think is, yeah, I'll send it to you.
I'd love to hear it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Did you guys make covers for it and sell it, or is it just like
We did. Yeah, I used to basically dupe it. My friend had like one of those boom boxes with the tape duplicator, and so I used to do that and take him to the record store Smash, and they'd buy like 5 or 10 at a time. And I guess maybe I sent it to MRR. I can't remember. But yeah, that's all we had, and then we did the 7-inch, and that was like, we're so excited because we went in and recorded with Don Zientara at Inner Ear. So that was for us it's such a thrill.
what did you guys tour much or at all outside of kind of DC area?
No, we actually we basically mostly played shows in Northern Virginia, mostly community centers, friends' houses. We played one show in Bethesda at a community center there, and that was like a bigger show with a government issue. And but yeah, not really. Not we didn't. Again, we didn't know how that stuff worked.
So how did Kids for Cash kind of end? And then is Edsel like right afterwards? Because it's a few years before Edsel puts out a record between the Kids for
Yeah.
Cash records.
Well, basically, so Kids for Cash, we were all in the same high school together. Our drummer went to college. Uh, Dave played with us. We got another drummer from a different high school, but then our bass player and singer, they were a year older than me. Then when they went off to college, that's when the band was done. And then I started a new band with some friends called Inside Out, not to be confused with Inside Out.
A third
It was,
Inside Out, because there's Inside Out New York too.
I mean, there's probably 35 Inside Outs, but the guy Brian who does that End on End podcast,
Yeah.
he was the bass player in Inside Out, and then our friend Ken played guitar, and then our friend Mike Dugan played drums. And Mike went on to play with a bunch of people, including he played with Ken Chambers from Moving Targets for a while. He now lives out in Portland. But we had that band for, it wasn't super long, maybe a year tops. And then I started going to college at American University, and that's when Edsel first started, was like 1989. But we didn't put anything out until we put out a 7 inch.
In '89, I
But then it was
think.
probably, yeah.
Um,
And then, but it was probably like another year or two before we put out our first record. Again, like so much of it, we just didn't know what we were doing. So it just took a while to kind of figure stuff out. And actually, I remember that the first 7 inch we put out, I called up Ian. And of course, we want to be on Discord, and so I was like, hey, so the band, blah, blah. And he was so great. He like his response was very positive, very encouraging, but essentially was like, you guys should do something yourself first, and part of me of course felt slightly rejected, but on the other hand I was like, he's right, like we haven't done anything, like we should do it. And it was such an instructive thing for us because I put out the Kids for Cash 7 inch, but that was like whatever, a lifetime previous. And so like just to figure out how you put out a 7 inch, like how you get it mastered, how you do the artwork, printed, distributed, all that stuff. And so learned a ton from doing that. Yeah.
the Kids for Cash 7 inch, you had pretty good distribution with it. Like I know there were copies floating around up here.
Yes, I'm trying to remember. I don't know if Discord helped with distribution, but yeah, I found somebody also. Remember at that time, you couldn't just press up like 200 copies. Like you had to press, I think there's like 1,000 or something. It was a lot of records. Like when they showed up at my mom's house, I was like, whoa, that's a lot of boxes of records. Uh, and so, and anytime I went somewhere, like my mom and I would go look at colleges or whatever, I would take a stack of 7 inches and we'd go to the record store and be like, hey, would you guys consign 5 Kids for Cash records? So I would try to get them around that way. Um, but yeah, it got around okay, actually. And part of it too is because it got reviewed in MRR, people were writing and ordering directly. So I would, shipping shipping them out myself. Uh, Something that to this day I still really hate doing, shipping out records. Uh, but uh, but yeah, but then so it was a couple years before Edsel, and then a couple years between when Edsel started and when we actually started to put out records. But then when we started touring, that was when we finally started to understand how kind of things worked. And we met up with the band Pitch Blend.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that
So
makes
we
sense.
toured yeah, so we toured a bunch of Pitch Blend, and then at the time Suzanne was booking them, was helping us out, and then we met this guy Joel in Chicago who was booking Chavez and Silkworm, and so then he started booking us, and so we got to go. We did a bunch of tours with Silkworm, and that really was. I mean, at that point, I'd say between '93 to '95, we were touring a lot, and it was great because we had never been in a situation where we could actually be that active as a band. So that was exciting. It was super fun.
So going back to Inside Out DC, what did Inside Out DC sound like?
It was basically, I would say, the Rites of Spring 7 inch.
Yeah, yeah.
That was probably the inspiration was there.
Oh, awesome.
So it was sort of jangly emo. uh,
Was it harsh
yeah.
vocals or
Ken was the singer, and his voice was kind of a little bit more chirpy. He
Mm.
had kind of a higher pitched voice. But I remember we used to cover Fortunate Son, which was pretty fun, the
That's
CCR
awesome.
song.
So, who would you guys be playing with in Inside Out when you were playing shows? Was it?
We actually did not play very many shows. We played one show at this Grange Hall. I think it was like Shudder to Think. I think Dane Bramage was supposed to play, though I don't think they ended up playing. There was another band from that area called Forthcoming. We played with them a couple times. I'm trying to remember if Moss Icon played that show or not. Anyway, yeah, we honestly we spent more time in my parents' basement just practicing and writing songs, just hanging out.
That's awesome. So,
But it was
are there recordings?
uh, I have a 4-track cassette recording somewhere.
Just throw it up on Spotify and steal some of those royalties from the
Yeah, from the other inside.
Inside
Yeah,
Out.
exactly.
That's why
Dear Zach.
I always think about like Revelation Records, how much money they've made off Connecticut Slipknot being accidentally sold to kids that thought they
Oh my
were
God,
buying Midwest
that's
Slipknot.
insane. Yeah, yeah,
Like
that's amazing.
it's got to be just after Gorilla Biscuits and Inside Out is one of the biggest selling things on the label because of that. I bet.
Right, 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 right. That's so funny. Yeah, and it was a short-lived band, but it was fun. And again, still friends with all those guys, so it's nice.
Well, much like Fart Blossom, another record label I'm obsessed with is Grass Records, where Edsel winds up for a time.
Yes.
How did that whole relationship with them come about?
Well, Camille, who ran the label, was awesome. Such a cool person, super into just like she listened to tons of music and had really interesting tastes. So when we were on Grass, the Wrens were on Grass, Brainiac was on Grass, um,
15.
15, yeah, Mousetrap. I mean, there was so many bands on Grass. It was really, really fun, honestly, because we would play with a bunch of those bands. And actually, this band Nectarine, which the guy Joel who booked Edsel, they were on Grass. And like that chairman of the board comp that is on Grass is that's a great compilation. The Jawbox coverage, Sinatra cover is awesome.
The
But
Jones tribute record,
Yeah,
Commander Cody was
yes.
too.
Uh, and what was Commander Venus?
Commander Venus, is that what I'm thinking of?
Is that what
Commander
it is?
Cody?
Is that the first the first Conor Oberst band?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I thought it was Commander
Yeah,
Cody, but maybe it's Commander
it's
Venus. I
I don't
apologize.
know, Commander something or other.
I'll
Yeah,
fix it in the intro.
uh, but uh, but yeah, she had really really cool bands, and I don't remember how we met her, but she was very very upfront. Like I want you guys on the label, and so it's not worth getting into. But we had a weird thing with the label that put out our first record, which was Merkin, which was a Baltimore-based label. Um, we had signed a contract that was we didn't have a lawyer. We didn't know how the whole thing worked, and so the guy who ran the label basically walked through the contract with us and made it seem like it was all kosher. We signed it later to be told by a lawyer that it was worse than any like 1930s blues contract he'd ever looked at, you know. But so when we wanted to leave, we couldn't leave, and so Camille had offered us a record deal, and we basically took the money from Camille and gave it to Merkin to get out of our contract. But then we did the 2 records for Grass, and then we did 1 record for Relativity, which was part of the Sony world.
Yeah, your Merkin situation sounds very much like our, uh, I guess, former shared label situation with J Tree.
J Tree,
Yeah,
yeah.
we got the J Tree treatment towards the end too. So.
It's it's funny because it's a weird thing because it's like sometimes you feel like you have so many shared interests with people, and then you introduce finances into it, and it gets murky fast.
Yeah, like my friend told me about this term that his friend um, invented, which is this term promoter core, and it's the idea that concert promoters have the broadest tastes ever in a certain type because they have to because they're able to shift,
Yeah,
and record label people, bands are seemingly the only ones that get stuck in time where you can't pivot. in a band. Like you can start a new band or something like that, but it's
Yeah,
not the same as where the business side of this industry is able to adapt in a way that the creative side can't really do it.
it's true. It's true. Yeah, you sort of get pigeonholed as being a certain thing. Um, it's funny, my wife and I joke about this in terms of siblings in a family, like very early on. I'm an only child. She's one of three, but we talk about the fact that like each sibling kind of gets pegged as being a certain way. And then your entire life, you're that,
You're that
it
kid.
doesn't matter if you've changed or not,
Yeah.
you're still the one that does X or Y.
I've also found like because I've got three kids. Now we have four kids living here because we had another kid move in with us. So we've got
Oh,
four kids here. But like there's but my three kids that I've kind of raised, and I see this with my friends. Third children are always the chillest. First children always have the most anxiety. Second ones are always dealing with the fact that they're caught in the middle. And it's like as much as I tried to prevent that from happening with my own kids, I'm like, oh, of course, like I'm a first time parent, so I'm going to be terrible with raising my first kid and an anxious wreck.
you're just so worried about everything all the
100%,
time.
right? And then now with the third kid, it's just like, whatever.
You'll survive.
You're going to be good. And that's why like all my friends are third children because they're always the most chill people.
That's my wife is the third.
Yeah, they're always the chillest, right? I say this is the first child, so I know that I'm an anxious wreck. So I own that. It's weird how it goes, but yeah. I guess like going back to Grass, like it feels like she obviously has an incredible ear. Like these bands that she signed, Toadies are on there too. There's
Yeah,
like
that's right. That's right.
a bunch of great bands, but it just seems like it never really connected or like it just I don't know, there was some issues with the label it seems, and then eventually it pivots and becomes like Evanescence's label.
Oh, yeah, because there was a guy who owned, I think it was called CD Direct, I think was the name of the company. And, this is obviously peak of the CD era. Because actually, that Edsel stuff never came out on vinyl. Our 7 inches obviously were vinyl, but the CD, those albums, no vinyl release.
Grass was weird about that too, right? Like there's very little vinyl, and the vinyl that was
Very little
pressed was
vinyl. Yeah.
hard to find. And
And so but at the time, mainly things were just coming out on CD. And so the guy who owns CD Presents had made a mint distributing CDs. And I don't know if he was a vanity project or what, decided he wanted a label. And he essentially bought Grass and made it whatever he changed the name to. Uh,
yeah, I didn't
and,
follow it
and
after
then,
that.
yeah. But at that point, actually, that same guy, Joel, that I mentioned who booked us, who was in Nectarine, he was hired as an A&R guy and he was handed, oh, what's the band? It's the terrible, terrible band.
On there?
Live.
Oh,
What is it?
live, yeah, yeah.
It's either live or if it's not live, it's like it's one of those like 90s grunty radio bands. It's not what's yeah, whatever that band is. I can't remember.
Collective Soul.
It's one of those. It's like,
Okay.
whatever. Somewhere between Live and Collective Soul, this band exists and they were massive. He was basically handed, they're like, you have to deal with this band. And they became huge. And so then, which was great for Joel, and great for the label. But I think at that point, I don't know if Camille was gone or not. But yeah, they had a totally different, they were much more commercially oriented. When it was Camille, so it was part of Dutch East. And so I remember we went to their warehouse out in Long Island and Homestead, was there too. So it was basically Homestead and Grass in this giant warehouse. And we always loved the Homestead bands. Like those Homestead compilations for us were like the holy grail. Like, the Wailing Ultimate. That compilation was for us just like the most amazing. Like Dinosaur Jr., Sonic Youth, Live Skull, Squirrel Bait. It was just like all the greatest music of that time period was on this one record. And so we're like, oh man, we're on Grass, and we liked our friends' bands were also on Grass. But we're like, if only we could be on Homestead, you know. Uh, but I don't know what the deal was with Grass. It couldn't gain traction for whatever reason. Maybe it was the logo.
I think it was also Dutch East. Like that's towards the
Yeah,
end of Dutch East, right? And like it took down a lot of stuff when it crashed to the ground.
yeah.
And because I would see the ads for these records in CMJ or Spin magazine, but you couldn't find them. Like at least I couldn't find them at my big chain record store that I was going to still at that point. I guess I was going to indie record stores at this point. And like maybe it's because we're in Canada, but there it didn't seem like the distribution was at least getting up here for a lot of the
Yeah,
stuff.
interesting. In the US, they did a pretty good job because when we were on tour, we definitely were finding our records were in or CDs were in stores and there were posters up and stuff like that. So it was I we were lucky in that regard. Part of it too was we were touring a lot, so maybe there was an easier sell. It was like this band's on tour, take 5 copies or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. But they were also putting out a lot of records at that time. I mean, like a lot. So maybe it was just the expenses were more than the income. I don't really know. But I will say that the number of good bands, while maybe not, proportionally not appropriate for making money doing a label, the number of good bands were kind of shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's all over the place in different scenes. And like we're touching on with like Connor Oberst, like there's people that would go on and have other careers, like, and clearly were great songwriters on that stuff. There's bands like the Wrens who have become massively collectible, and people seem to have a new appreciation for them. Like, it feels like a lot of it was wrong time, maybe, for some of the
Yeah,
stuff, or and it's also, I feel like, as much as there's this sort of like alternative boom that happens, the major labels, like you were saying with like Live Collective Soul, whatever it sounds like, are are consolidating this stuff, and it's like very much becoming like integrated into the machine in real time. So by the time like 93, 94, it's like alternative music sucked. Like so
yep,
quickly it sucked in the mainstream.
yeah, yeah. It became seemingly the sort of the industrial complex of rock and roll, where the radio stations are having these big alternative festivals, and it just sort of becomes like, I don't know, just fodder for just mainstream culture, which so many of those bands, like, that wasn't our background,
Yeah.
and I will say, there is a feeling of excitement sometimes when you participate in these things that you recognize as being part of a world that's not yours, that you don't ordinarily participate in. But at the end of the day, for me, that's not really what it's about, So it's yeah, the moment of excitement is there, the satisfaction is not there.
Yeah, and like to get to like really succeed in the music industry, like on another level, like Chris from the Foo Fighters was on the podcast, and I was like, "Do you think No Use for a Name could have done what the Foo Fighters did?" Like, obviously, like economy of scale considering. He's like, "No fucking way. We never had the work ethic that the Foo Fighters have." Like,
Yeah.
and there's also like a constitution stomach component, because I think a lot of us coming out of punk and hardcore don't have the stomach to do the bullshit that you kind of need to do to get famous, and I think that winds up holding bands back a little bit. And I say this like we were called fucked up, so we didn't really have to make a lot of these really hard decisions. But even when we did, it was like, oh, like that's so corny. We can't do that. Like, so
Yeah, it's also, I just remember, like, when Edsel finally did the record on Relativity, we had to fight all these really just dumb fights with the label. I mean, it was like, I remember when the record was coming out, we're like, hey, can you just make the price low? Don't put a sticker that says special low price. Just make the price low. It'll be recognized as being a low price when they see the price. And when you put the sticker on the thing, please don't say featuring this song or that song. We're not featuring any songs. It's just an album. Sure enough, the record comes back and it's like, special low price featuring. And we're like, oh, come on, man. Like, we asked you, And then they're like, well, we could send them back to the warehouse and take all the stickers off. Your record will come out a month later. I'm like, fine, just put them out there. And again, at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter, but it's just, you realize that, like, it's not your world. You're not living in your world. It's their world. And you're just like tiptoeing through it, hoping, you get lucky somehow. And it's a weird scene.
it's a lot of luck to, like you're saying too, like getting like the right person that understands your band and like can see what you see in it. Like it just feels like right place, right time. Like, how
Well,
were
they don't have
you?
the reference points, you know. They
Yeah,
don't have any of the reference points. Like I remember some dude came to the meeting with a baseball bat. He's like, "I'm looking to hear a hit," you know, and I'm just like, "This is just gross," you know. I'm like, "This is so late. Like, who is this Joker?" You
yeah,
know.
yeah. Was like by the time you guys signed to Relativity, were like internally, was it still like cohesive? Because it's like the fourth record by that point, right? Like, are you? Is it?
Yes,
Does
it
it feel
was
like?
actually. No, it actually it was we for us we thought, oh, this was a chance to do what we've always done, but to basically have a little bit more resources to be able to do it in a way where you didn't have to live in your parents' basement, you know. And so what we did, we didn't get a ton of money, but Jeff, our bass player, was really smart about this. He's like, okay, let's figure out a recording budget, and then let's figure out the rest of the money that where we could pay ourselves a monthly salary, so we can actually be on tour and cover our rent or save that money. So when we come back from tour, we're not totally living on scratch, you know. And so that actually worked out really great. And a bunch of our friends, you know, Jawbox, Shutter Think and stuff, they made these amazing records. Those their major label records are, I think, really, really excellent records. Um, but they basically took the money they had and made like more robust versions of records they had kind of already made. And we thought, well, we don't want to do that. So we went to Liverpool and recorded with people who had worked on like My Bloody Valentine, Loveless, and worked on with you know spiritualized and people that we thought would be interesting to work with and would be sort of out of our wheelhouse a little bit and make like give us a more interesting experience because at the end of the day, and we also did this in obits, like we just realized this is all experiential stuff, you know. So it's it's your life that you got, you know. And like in the same way that I don't want to work a corporate job, I don't want to be in a band to serve the man, you know, because I've got to experience it. It's my day, you know. And so we're like, all right, let's go to Liverpool. And we had an amazing time. And it was truly like one of the greatest recording experiences I've ever had. Spend 5 weeks in a city like Liverpool and to work with these really interesting people and to really just focus on your music and think about what it is you're trying to do. And then also to have enough money where you come home and you're like, all right, my rent's covered, so I'm good, you know.
Were you guys playing shows when you were over there, or is it just recording?
Played one show at the very end of it. We played one show. That was one thing. Edsel never cracked the code for going to the UK and going to Europe. It wasn't until Obits that we started going over. And I mean, regret is too strong of a word, but I wish that Edsel had gotten a chance to go over and play in the UK and tour in Europe because I realized when Obits did, I was like, ah, this is so much fun.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's interesting though because it like it's so normalized come the late 90s to go there, but like prior to that, it feels like it was. There's certain bands, like certain capital H hardcore bands that would be able to go over there, metal bands, but it wasn't just necessarily as open as it would be.
No, I mean our friends who were in DC bands on Discord, they were able to do it because they had a connection with Deconcurrent in Netherlands, and so a lot of those bands, like Soulside, when they went over, they went to Eastern Europe before the wall came down, so they were going over there from like 1989 and stuff, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
And
Scream was going over too because they used to stay at my friend's
yes,
house.
oh really?
Yeah, and it's funny
Yeah,
because
so
well, it's funny because he's like a pro wrestler, and but he's also like a big time hardcore kid. And when I did the show with the guys, there I was like, "Do you know Robbie Brookside?" And they were like, "Oh my God, we stay at his house all the fucking time."
it's amazing.
Yeah,
So those bands were able to go over because they had that connection with Discord and Deconcurrent, but we did not. So Edsel never made it over there, but Obits did, and I was so glad about that because it opened up a whole nother world for me, both on a musical level and also just like meeting people. And I've continued to do that with the band that I'm in now. We go to Europe, you know, once a year at least, and it's amazing.
welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Well, I felt like I had a lot more to talk to you about, and I felt like rather than rushing the end of the last one, give it a break. You had a chance to step away from the punishment, and so you came
I
back.
was shocked at how much we talked about, and yet we'd only gotten to like 1986 or something.
It moves slow. This is a podcast. I'll jump ahead now because I think we could probably wind up doing a part two down the line.
No, actually, it
So
was we were like at 93 at least. I
yeah,
saw. I didn't.
well, we'll move into a bit of a more rapid pace, but I
Right.
guess I kind of wanted to know when you first came in contact with all the people in San Diego.
It's funny when I was in Edsel, we would play out there, and we were sort of in a circle adjacent to the one that I ended up becoming friends with. But we didn't first meet Rick and John and those guys until I was in Obits with Rick, really. Before that, when Edsel was out there, we would play with like A Miniature and bands like that. And so, and those people all knew each other, but we weren't aware of who knew who. But we always liked it out there. We really loved playing out there and loved some of those bands, but just didn't make actually that connection. Like I didn't meet Rick until years later. So yeah.
It's so fascinating in San Diego how many different kind of scenes, and like you're saying, they're all interconnected, but there's all these sort of like separate scenes going on at the exact same time. Uh,
Yes, yes. And it
there's
seems like there's a couple of people who kind of, work like they're kind of the Venn diagram of, like Rob Crow or somebody like that. I feel like he has a foot in so many different things. And I remember actually I think Edsel played with Thingy or Heavy Vegetable, one of those bands of his. And again, I didn't know that he was good friends with Rick and John. It just I hadn't made those connections yet. So, but yeah, it is amazing. Like, and DC has a similar thing though, where there were so many bands that happening simultaneously that maybe musically you don't think of as being lockstep with one another, but the people were all part of the same, you know, social group.
I had this conversation yesterday with two people that it's kind of the same like weird thing happens over time where these like little minor differences between scenes become invisible to people as you get further away from it, and it feels like big divisions when you're in it at the time. Like sometimes it's small divisions, but like as people step further and further away, it's like, oh no, it's all the same thing. All this sort of like minutia that separate everything just doesn't seem to matter. And all these, it feels like we're on an island, and as the water level keeps rising as we get older, like we keep getting forced closer and closer together, and these people that you never thought you'd wind up in bands with or just didn't know about, you wind up becoming really tight friends with over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's an element, the older you get, sort of the more of the lifer factor comes into play. So, a lot of people, their other parts of their lives become more of the focal point. And so the music part and those things start to taper off. But for those of us who can't seem to get away from it, we're there, looking for the longest straw to breathe while the water rises.
I also feel like, oh, in San Diego's another person like you're talking about, like one of those great joiners of all
Absolutely.
these different scenes.
Yes. Yes, for sure. Yeah. It's also funny, like I didn't realize that people I knew in DC knew other people in San Diego. That again, there were all these other various crossovers. So, for example, like I played in a band with James Canty, and so he would know a different group of people in San Diego that I wouldn't know until later. But I wouldn't have known then at the time that he knew those. It's just. But also at the time, if you're in a touring band, you're busy, and so you're not necessarily sitting around chit chatting about like who you're hanging out with or whatever. You know.
And also, media was at a premium back then, and even like zines and things like that. So you might not even hear about bands that could be happening even in your own hometown at the same time. Like it's amazing how many times people come on this show being like, "Yeah, I had no idea there was this sort of parallel punk scene happening at the same time because it just didn't cross over to where we were two towns
Absolutely.
over."
Yeah, no, and I think zines were so crucial in terms of having that kind of localization and getting to know about, I mean, obviously there were the scene reports and MRR or whatever, but to actually have a local fanzine. And in fact, I remember Savak, the band that I play in now, we did a couple shows with Mike Watt in Europe, and he did a Q&A thing, and people were asking him, like, in the early days of the Minutemen, like, how did you guys know where to play or what bands to play with? And he was like, it was all zines. you'd get the local zine, and that kind of like tipped you off, like, who you should try to call and set up a show with. And I was like, man, that's still, I mean, obviously we have the internet now, but well into the, like, deep into the 90s, it was still zines. I mean, I'm sure it still is for some people, but in terms of the music culture that I was participating in at the time, it was like deep into the 90s where Flipside was still a growing concern.
Yeah, and I feel like Maximum Rock and Roll is weirdly like this great unifier, but also this thing that if Max Rock and Roll didn't like your band, or if you didn't like Max Rock and Roll and choose not to engage with Max Rock and Roll, you kind of were left out of a large part of the punk conversation at the given time because it was so read, especially
Yeah.
internationally. Like it became the
I would actually love to know what their circulation was, because thinking about it now, I mean, it really is kind of nuts how deep, the veins of MRR went all around the world.
yeah, and I think it's one of those like I remember when Vice was popping off, they would always brag about the fact that like they had a circulation of however many hundreds of thousands at that point, but each of those issues were going to be read by five or six other people. And so there
Yeah.
was like this massive sort of greater circulation. And I think Maximum Rock and Roll, like every issue was read by like 15 to 20 people.
I mean, I mean, I don't have them anymore, but for years I kept them. I had just like stacks of them.
I
And
will go
yeah.
on, sorry. No, go on, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say, and actually, I have a friend now who's in Lyon, France, and he's going back and he's trying to collect all the flip sides. And I think he's close if he hasn't gotten them yet. But it's like, and he, because he's in France, he's found some in the US that he's had sent to me. So then next time I see him, I deliver them. And so, I get to flip through them. And man, it remained a pretty great fanzine, and covered so much stuff. It was pretty impressive.
Maybe it was just my age, but I got the tail end of Flipside, and Maximum Rock and Roll, I think, kept going strong for a few more
Yes.
years after. Uh, I always felt Flipside like I was looking at someone else's club a little bit. Whereas with Max Rock and Roll, it really felt like, oh, any idiot can just get their band interview in here. Like I knew my friends were getting interviewed for Max Rock and Roll.
Yeah. For me, it was a really big deal when the Kids for Cash 7-inch got reviewed and MRR. That was just like, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Like you're part of the same thing that you're reading all of a sudden.
It made fucked up. Like our Max Rock and Roll review was from the demo to the first 7-inch, I think were really what established our band and even legitimized it to me a little bit. Like,
That's
oh
so,
my,
yeah, it's so cool.
like you're saying, it was like it's such a key review. It was it was like the Pitchfork review of its era.
Totally, yeah. And then also I remember, I mean, after we got that review, different, like you mentioned last time we were on, we talked about a couple of those compilations. Like I think Cancerous Growth was one that we talked about. And those all came from basically getting a good review in MRR. Because, we had our address, and so then people contacted. And it is amazing what came of those. And, um, it's also just, when you're 15, it's really exciting to see yourself all of a sudden in the mix with stuff that, has always just been outside of you, and all of a sudden you're a participant, and that's a really pretty fun thing.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And like to have these writers that were influencers, like the columnists, right? And like to get like a certain columnist to write about your band, it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm recognized by this person who I've read every month and I love and I trust their tastes. Like tastes of
Uh,
these people is
I
so
also love the
important.
personalities, like Tim Yohannan, like a personality, like I don't know if it's Michael or Mikkel Board, whatever, like that guy, super personality, and like
Yeah.
I really liked that. It was a really, I don't know, it made it seem really vibrant and exciting, like these are real people with like strong opinions.
Did you ever meet Tim when you were out in San Francisco?
I did once. I did when they were, I can't remember, they were like in a sort of a townhouse in San Francisco, and I visited, but they had already gotten to, like, it was a pretty slick operation at that point. And I met him once there, and I tried to, he was Iranian, so I tried to be all like, hey, you know, but he was busy, so I was like, all right, well.
Yeah, he's a such a fascinating figure because even though, like you're saying, it's a pretty slick operation, it's got this crazy circulation. There must be money coming through, and the temptation at that point would be, well, let's take this to the next level. Let's see what we can do with this thing. Let's make some real money. But yet he still did this as a second job and worked insane hours on top of a full-time job as a
Did he really?
custodian. Yeah, he was a
I didn't
custodian.
realize that. Oh, wow. Wow.
And so that's the problem that MRR faced when he passed away. It's like, how do you manage this operation that any other place would be, a six-figure a year kind
Right.
of job, uh, as
Because
a
he was also like an actual adult too.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
he wasn't like a kid in his parents' basement or something.
No, it took a vow of poverty to kind of be the editor of that thing and agree that you do this insane workload on top of another job. And
But I was impressed because I remember going there and like I can't remember who it was, if it was like Jason Traeger or something like that. But he showed me their setup and they had like proper computers with like I think he had two monitors, and I was like, oh my, it was like pro. I was like, man, this is so cool. Like they took it really seriously.
and it's still like they had that house for so long. Like I went there after he passed away, but you could feel his presence still loom so large over that
I
place.
bet.
They had a radio station in there. They had still a website. It's still going in some capacity, but it's
I get their emails for their like what they're playing on the radio, which I always like to see. And it's still interesting. Like I always recognize a couple things and I'm curious about the stuff I don't recognize. So it's cool.
and it's still a discovery place for people and still something to kind of radiate out this sort of stuff. So yeah, like it's such a I'm fascinated by these people, like you said, these lifers that, and I think I feel like at this point in my life, I think I am a lifer in music and connected to this thing, but where you just kind of do this not because there's a reason to do it in the traditional sense of like this helps my career or this advances me socially, or you just do it because you got to do it. Like this podcast, like this, it takes so much work for very little reward.
With the sponsorship money you're getting.
Yeah, yeah. That's
No,
what
I
I'm saying.
know.
Like the ads, and it's like, man, I really do feel like maybe it was the same thing with Max Rock and Roll. I just underestimated how little revenue was generated by these ads each month.
Right. And the work that goes into it is the same. I
Yes.
mean, that's the thing. It's like your time is still your time. And if you care about it, which you obviously do, you're putting in a lot of time because you want it to be good. And that's the thing. It kind of has to be its own reward. Otherwise, the exterior rewards are just not there, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think that's the thing about punk that makes it so awesome is that there is this sort of like ingrained humbleness. Like, who the fuck am I to expect something out of this thing other than the reward of just getting to do it? Because
Yeah.
Tim Yohannan worked as a janitor doing Maximum Rock and Roll. Like there's bands that are some of the greatest bands ever that didn't even get records out. Like this,
Right.
the Screamers never even
Right.
had a record, and to be lucky enough to be part of this thing and get to contribute to this thing, it's like that's the blessing of being involved in it. Like we don't. That's the humbleness that you kind of have to accept. Like you shouldn't expect to be Blink 182 because you'd have to be Blink 182.
I'm sure that comes with its detriments.
Exactly, right? Like as much as I would want some of the trappings of being Blink 182, I don't know if I'd want the burden of being Blink 182.
I sincerely cannot imagine what that would be like. And also just to wake up every day and you look in the mirror and you're like, I'm that guy.
I'm the guy. I'm the guy. Like
But I think one of the things that I really like, and one of the reasons that I still feel sort of compelled to participate, is just the social element of it, the connecting people and feeling connected to other people, and that to me is always incredibly rewarding. I mean, like I just came back from Australia and saw some people there that I knew here from the States. And so it's fun to see them in, so far, like halfway across the world. And it sort of reinforces these friendships and these sort of sense of like, yeah, man, we have something in common. We share this thing together. And then similarly, I have a friend who's going over in a couple weeks and he was asking like, oh, do you know anybody in Sydney? And I was able to put him in contact with some friends there. It's just that constant, able to sort of like thread the needle and keep this, breathe life into it for, I don't know, for myself, I guess, really. It's breathing life into me is what it's doing.
yeah, there's no I'm so lucky I found this because it just opened up my world so much. And my mom was a flight attendant and my stepfather was a pilot, so I got to travel, but you don't, even as a tourist, like you could have all the money in the world and you could get to travel to all the places in the world, but you wouldn't get a like sort of the gift of understanding places in the same way I think we do as punk rock people that get to know people in other parts of the world and get to have these, like you're saying, deep relationships. I've got friends everywhere, and I could probably have friends any place I went if I could find who the punk kids were there, because we do have this sort of common thing. It's like outside of maybe religion, which
Yeah.
obviously missionary religion carries a lot of problems outside of itself too. So like, like a less problematic version of this sort of like missionary religion sort of world where we can go all over the world and kind of like meet people and be immersed in culture in a way that you wouldn't have it. And in the same way, people could come here and they would have the same sort of experience because there is sort of
Yeah.
that free interchange.
I mean, I imagine like all at Discord House, there must be, I don't know, people every day coming to take that photo on that porch, you know?
I kind of think
And
of eventually just gonna have to move that house to Vegas and just set it up as an attraction
next to CB's,
next to CB's. Yeah.
like there'll be like one long hallway with all the, like the whiskey, CB's, Discord House, but it is a funny thing where I do think that like, you know, the fact that it can connect people from around the world, and you have these, even if they're not shared experiences, like we didn't go to the same shows, but we went to the similar shows and we sort of know the aesthetic and the kind of the um I don't know, the vocabulary of it all, and it's just sort of like this shared language, and I think that's such an amazing thing about it. But I will say, skateboarding is another one that I think does that. And when my son was younger, he no longer is into skating, but he was younger. We took a couple trips, and thanks to Instagram and skateboarding culture, like we were in Athens, Greece, and he like found where the spot was, and like met some kids there, and they were like, "Oh man, you're from New York," and he's like, "You guys are in Athens," and they followed each other on Instagram for a while and would send messages. And I was like, this actually kind of reminds me of the same thing with hardcore. It's just like you have that thing where you're like, hey, we have this shared curiosity about this thing, and it makes you open too, I think, which is a really nice thing. I mean, the world at large may seem sort of grim, but you have this little, this hole that you can see it through, this lens that makes it seem a little sunnier, a little a little more connected.
You're right. Like I think graffiti as well. Like I think all these
Yes.
subcultures kind of have now gained this sort of interconnectedness. But I think if someone had shown up at the banks in New York in the 90s, maybe not, they wouldn't have had the same sort of reception.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like, but I feel punk and hardcore, like we were talking about, had this sort of interconnectedness even back then. Like pre-internet, we had this sort of like built-in, and I guess not every aspect of punk culture embraced the international aspects of it as much as certain parts of
No.
hardcore,
Yeah.
but um, it is something that I find so interesting, like how things connect, like how you're connected through working with Arturo Lindsay,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
which I someone I've always been fascinated with because of their the work with DNA and his work with like various other projects over the years. But how did that come about? Because you engineered the record he produced, his own record, right?
Yeah, well, so I worked on two records with Ardo, and it came about. Well, I guess you could make the connection back through Rick. So Rick was working at a place called Funny Garbage, which was an animation house in Soho, and they were doing these web cartoons. This was like still dial-up modem style. So the deal was you had to make these cartoons really as fun as possible, but they had to be pretty low res. So, but it still had to work, and they needed somebody to do soundtrack for the cartoons. So Rick was like, "Hey man, would you be up for this?" And I said, "Absolutely." So he set me up with an interview. I got a job at this place, and it was really fun just doing music for web cartoons. And we worked with Gary Panter on a cartoon and just a bunch of really neat projects. But there was a recording studio there, and there was a guy named Andres Levine, who's this Venezuelan, just like amazing musician, producer guy, and he sort of ran the studio, and it was like a proper recording studio. But the deal was he would do his sessions at night, and during the day I could use it to do the soundtrack stuff. And so one day I was there with him and he was like, "Hey, I don't know what you're doing tonight. I'm supposed to do a session. I can't make it. It's a friend. He's really cool. I don't think it'll be very long." And I was like, "All right, yeah, sure, whatever. Sounds good." He didn't tell me who it was or what the deal was. And so this guy shows up. I was like, "No, he looks kind of familiar." And I was like, "Hey, I'm Sohrab. What's up?" And he's like, "Hey, I'm Dre's friend Ardo." And I was like, "That's Ardo, okay." And he's like, "I'm doing the sound for this installation, and it's supposed to sound like these giant wings flapping." And I was like, "Oh my God, I have no idea how to do that." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't either, but it's like I brought a couple of pillowcases." And so like we had the most fun just like being ridiculous trying to make these like giant condor wing flapping sounds out of two pillowcases. And we just hit it off. And at the end of the session, a couple hours later, he was like, "Well, look, I'm going to work on a record soon, and I think Dre might be busy. If you're up for it, would you want to do it?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." I said, "But here's the deal. I'm not an actual engineer. Like I can run Pro Tools, you know, that part I'm good with, but I'm not the guy who like knows which microphone you put on what fret of a violin or whatever, you know." And he's like, "That's cool. I don't care. Like we get along. That's good enough for me. And you know how to run Pro Tools." So we basically rented a rig and put it in his living room and made an album called Salt. And then a year later, we did another record. And then through that, we ended up working on this project with Debbie Harry for the Mikhail Baryshnikov's dance troupe, which was totally bonkers because that is not my world at all. So, to be like the guy from Kids for Cash, to be like recording Debbie Harry and then like doing a walkthrough with Mikhail Baryshnikov to make sure the sound is right or whatever. I was like, this is insane. But it was fun, man. It was really fun. And I learned a ton because Melvin Gibbs, who played bass with Rollins, is Ardo's bass player and kind of his sort of musical director. And so he's a great guy and learned a ton from him. And, all those guys, they're just such music heads, but it's not like they know about hardcore, but that's not their world. But like Ardo is just so deep into the Brazilian thing, and so he turned me on to so many great records, and like, he would have CDRs that like Brian Eno would send him of like jams, and so I was just getting turned on to this really cool, interesting stuff. And Melvin had his own world of stuff that he was into that was really, I don't know, it was a pretty lovely experience.
Did he tell any DNA stories to you? Because the no wave stuff, like his connection to that, I guess also he's from Virginia originally, right?
South Carolina, I think, and actually his parents were missionaries. So that's why he went to Brazil, was they went over as missionaries. And his brother, I think, still lives over there. And actually, Ardo ended up moving over there. He lived in Chelsea when we were making these records, but years later, he ended up moving back to Brazil. But uh, he didn't really talk much about the DNA stuff. I will say I didn't quiz him about that stuff. I mean, I didn't really feel self-conscious about it, but also didn't want to be that dude, like taking a
You,
break and be like, "Hey, so you know,
that's why you need this
contortions."
podcast. You need this podcast because it's the only acceptable place to punish people about this sort of stuff. I find that's why I had to do it because you're right. Because you're backstage at a show or you're working with someone, you can't just like unload on them with questions.
Contortions, were they really good or what steel? No, I mean, he did tell funny stories that, I mean, he's a really funny guy. And he told me about like this first time he saw like Patti Smith, the first time she ever played, I think was at uh, Max's Kansas City. And he said she was just super young, really nervous, and was just like reading poetry. And I can't remember, somebody was maybe playing guitar with her. And he was just like, it was terrible. Like he said, if you had told me then that this person would become the Patti Smith that we all know, I would have like laughed you out of the room.
I think that's the prerequisite to be the band that becomes super famous out of the scene is you have to be terrible and people to be like, if you had told me, because like going back to Blink 182, that's certainly the reoccurring thing you hear from people from San Diego, including from Blink 182 themselves.
Like we were terrible.
Yeah, we were like, why us of all these
Yeah.
people? I don't know if Patty would have that same level of humbleness looking back on the early years, but
Yeah.
still, like you kind of need to be you need to stand out because you're so bad before you can be so good to stand out, I guess.
Yeah. I guess just the willingness to stick your neck out. Um, but it was interesting to get Ardo's take on like 77 punk and stuff like that. Like he was not a fan. Like he thought the Clash were kind of bogus. And it was he had some really interesting takes on stuff. No, I didn't, like we disagreed on some stuff. Like he was not a Wire fan. I was like, well, you're wrong about that one, buddy.
I
I was like,
find
you can think the Clash are bogus. That's on you, but the Wire, no, you're wrong.
you're right though. I do find that with the no wave people, like it's almost like the same inputs going into 77, and then 77 punk kind of happens and they're just like, nope, we're doing something,
I
I
think it was
guess,
too
no
rock and
wave.
roll for them.
Oh
I think there was too much rock and roll, too much blues in the 77 stuff. And I think for them that was like, you know.
yeah, it's you're right, like 'cause it's I always talk about this now on the show. It's like my verbal tick, I guess. But like there's like this double helix of school art, not art school, but like art pretension, and then sort of like street rock and roll. And the two are going and kind of intersecting, and that's what punk rock is at the intersection point. But then, no wave is sort of that helix of the art pretension kind of going one way, and yeah, the Clash are the helix going the other way. Like they had some like
Absolutely.
it was very traditional in their kind of
Yeah, I mean they're
approach.
like Bo Diddley basically, it's like Bo Diddley jacked up or whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
which I love, but I get it. It's not for everybody. But it's funny because that world of no wave people, then later they got super like musical, you know what I mean? Like they got really into either like electronic stuff, which involved a lot of heavy composition and a lot of sort of academic kind of familiarity with gear. Or like afterwards, Arda was in Ambitious Lovers, and that's a really pretty slick band with like, in fact, the guy Peter Scherer, I think is his name, who was his partner in Ambitious Lovers, played on one of the Arda records. And that was actually really funny because he came over with his keyboard and Arda's like, all right, it's going to be the same DX7 sounds that he always uses. And I was like, well, can we just get like a MIDI out and like make the sounds better? And he's like, nope, that's Peter's thing. I was like, okay, you know. And sure enough, man, I was like, wow, this guy's great, but those sounds are like so from a time period, And Arta's like, that's why I love him, you know. Uh, but it's like that. Like Ambitious Lovers was a very slick musical band, and those records that they made are really like very high end records. I mean, I think they did. What's the dude from Chic? I think he produced one of those records.
and they're on celluloid, aren't they? I think the that
Maybe
French.
I know those early Lounge Lizards ones are.
Yeah, I
He
thought they
did
were
tell me some
too.
Lounge Lizard stories, which were good, but probably not on mic.
Yeah, I feel like that's also part of the no wave thing. Is it got pretty raw pretty quickly with like some of those people, and like
Well, I
I
think
guess
some of that stuff got popular. Like I think the Lounge Lizards got really popular, and so I think that brought a whole level of attention that those people were not used to.
yeah,
Which brings with it all the weird stuff.
yeah, and then but I guess also like you look at even the cinema of transgression stuff and the people that kind of got into that, and just some of those movies are not safe for the internet.
No, no, definitely not. And honestly, by today's standards, pretty questionable.
Yeah,
But again, I think a lot of that transgressive stuff, it's hard to say. There was a time and a place where that kind of transgression, it carried a different set of values, and I don't know that you can say it's right or wrong. I think it's hard sometimes to contextualize things in like the modern framework because it's I don't know. I mean, I'm not to make excuses for anybody because like bad behavior is bad behavior, but I think there's just also some stuff where like, if you don't have the vocabulary for it or you're sort of fighting a different fight, sometimes it's not always as clean cut as I think we like to make it seem so, in the modern dressing.
a lot of it, I think, looking back, were people kind of playing, and whether or not they were even aware of this at times, but doing like kind of pro wrestling heel work, where it was like we all knew, oh, this person knows better, or you hoped that they knew better, or you thought they knew better at that time. And in some cases, yeah, it proved out they did actually know better, and they were just being a heel. Like, I think Steve Albini is very open about his sort of journey in this, and looking back on it, like I think a lot of times he was just saying things to get that reaction from people because it was what got him attention and feedback, and that's what you're doing it for, those endorphins, I guess.
But also the crazy thing to think about is like at that time, whether it was Steve Albini or like, even like Gerard Cosloy, like with Conflict or whatever, like those guys, like they took on really harsh positions, but that wasn't mass culture. That was like this little tiny little thing that they were working within. And so I think that's the hard part sometimes to, I think, put into context is like now everything can be everywhere. There's no, the circulation is infinite, but when you're printing, I don't know, 2,000 copies of Conflict magazine or whatever, that's a small audience. And
Yeah,
so when you're taking on those positions, you sort of the community that you're doing it within. You don't have to
100%.
explain yourself to like the larger world. The larger world doesn't exist,
Yeah, and the thought is like you have to know somebody to get possession of this thing, and so it's not like this is necessarily falling into the hands of someone that wouldn't 100% understand it.
Right.
So that, but then you look at someone like Gavin McGinnis, that very much I think would have been at the time, like self-described as politically left, and was in an anarchist band back then.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah, with Anil Chinook, with the guy from One Speed Bike and Godspeed You Black Emperor.
Really?
Yeah, and someone from Melissa Oftemar's first band was also in it too.
Crazy.
And they were part of that Five Arlington kind of music scene and would play shows there with like all the Ottawa bands of the era, right? Like all like the greats, the Ottawa, like so there's such an amazing scene out of that Ottawa punk scene in sort of the late '90s or early '90s, late '80s, and he got all this information and then just took it and started talking about Screwdriver to a group of people that took it and ran with it and nearly overthrew and looked like they still might overthrow the American government.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The like the Proud Boys. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. It is strange. I guess you never know where people are going to go. And sometimes those, yeah, you push the barrier just enough and then you pop out somewhere unexpected.
Yeah, it was such a weird time because you look back on it now, like it was the culture of transgression was such a big part of where sort of like mainstream punk went. I guess it was post Nirvana too, like a reaction to Nirvana, where it's like, okay, we got to make sure we're not this version of what this thing is that went mainstream.
Yeah. Or even like if you go before that, like the use of swastikas in like 77 punk and stuff. I mean, it's a pretty bold thing. I mean, by today's standards, you'd be like, that's just nuts. Who would ever do that? But it was common, or to wear like the Iron Cross or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting when, and I maybe they've changed it now, but when you went into the punk museum in Las Vegas, like one of the first things you see is a photo of Steve Baders wearing a swastika T-shirt, and it's something that needs a lot of contextualizing because,
Yeah.
like you're saying, there's a whole wave of people that, and not that it's ever understandable, and I think maybe people's reaction to it is completely justified, but at the time, like you're saying, it was ex- not accepted, but it was just part of the culture in the way that it was like all these people experimenting with iconography and things that maybe they shouldn't have been experimenting with, which is another, I think, reoccurring theme in punk rock throughout it is people like testing the limits of music and also testing the limits of ideology and just sort of testing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about this before, but one of the things that first attracted me to when I first heard certain hardcore things, like whether it was the Meatmen or whatever, it was like I had just never heard lyrics like that put to me, lyrics. I had never heard words like that put to music, and it kind of just blew me away because I thought, wow. I mean, not that I was so young. I mean, that's those Meatmen songs seem funny to me that now they seem incredibly homophobic and stuff, but it it was shocking, but in a really positive way to me. Like it just meant like, oh, you could do anything, like all avenues are available. And that to me was really compared that with like mainstream rock and roll, which is what's around you. I was like, this is cool. This is a thing. You can be whoever you want to be, and you can pretend to be somebody. You can take on a character. And that's the thing too. Is I think a lot of the outrageous stuff. It's like a person playing a character. Uh, and so that's part of it. Is like there's a theatrical element to it, and I don't know. It's interesting. And it makes people on the outside uncomfortable, right? Because they don't get that. They don't. Is this person playing a character? Because I'm not familiar with this. It's just like they hear like let's lynch the landlord, and they're like, what is that? Or I kill children,
Yeah.
and they're just like, what is wrong with this person? You're like, no, 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 no. It's not. He doesn't kill children.
It's funny to think about the guys from Minor Threat winding up in the Meatmen as being
Yeah,
this sort of like setting the I guess the archetype for the reactionary band after the hardcore band kind of thing, where the band that was Minor Threat winding up becoming
yeah. I guess
this.
Brian and Lyle, right? Both of them,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that's
Yeah.
favored periods of their careers to talk about now in retrospect.
I'm sure it must have been fun. I mean, because the thing is, I think there was a really strong connection, excuse me, a Detroit DC connection. And the guy who actually started Touch and Go fanzine was a Detroit guy who ended up working. I think I had mentioned last time in that record store Yesterday and Today. So he worked there, and so yeah, that guy Dave and Tesco, I guess, were old buddies, and so they knew the early DC dudes, and so I don't know. I imagine when Brian and Lyle joined the Meatmen, it was just like a fun, ridiculous, war of the super bikes or whatever it was. Uh,
This is gonna really piss off Ian. I can't wait to see his reaction
I have
here.
to say, speaking of lifers, I have to say when you have people like Ian as the sort of the helm of the lifers, it makes it attractive to be a lifer because you're like that guy still has his head screwed on his shoulders pretty darn well.
Yeah, he's definitely like, well, like there's all these sort of lifer people now that we can look at, like Jello by Afra being another person, and like the idea of like what does it look like to grow old as a punk and to be still involved with this thing that is so tied to youth and youthful idealism. And it's amazing that these people kind of did these records in their early 20s that maybe not every single song, but there's like a large part of the lyrics they can still stand by, or at least the
Yeah,
sentiment later in life. And
yeah.
it speaks, I guess it speaks a lot to the path that these kind of people set for themselves and were able to follow.
It's also interesting to have the idea that as a late teenager or an early 20s person, that you would have sort of a vision of the world that you can stand with, so many years later. Because I know for myself, I've changed so much since I was a teenager, and there's still many things that I feel similarly about, but I've also evolved in certain ways, and I can't imagine what it'd be like to sort of for people to still hold you, like to tether you to a version of yourself from the past.
Yeah, like it must be like because I don't experience this in my life playing in a band, but like it must be like nerve-wracking to think every single night, fuck, I'm gonna play this show, and then someone's gonna ask me about straight edge. I'm gonna have to talk to like some dude about straight edge who's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
pissed off about it in some way, or
yeah,
like I'm not a Krishna person, but I like thinking about Ray Capo every single night, still having to debate someone about Hare Krishna stuff
yeah.
after years of being involved in this thing. And it's just sort of this albatross that you have to carry because these songs that you wrote as a teenager somehow remain so important to the people that listen to them.
Yeah, they're like foundational. But I guess the thing about, well, Ian, I don't know Ray, but and the thing that I like about it is that he's willing to listen and engage. Like I think if somebody comes up to him, I imagine there's some part of him in his head. I have no idea, but I imagine just being human, there's some part of him that's like, oh God, this again. you
Yeah.
know. But he takes people seriously and he takes them at face value. And it's like, okay, like even that whatever that part of you is that's like, you're like, all right, man, like This is you've had now have a chance to ask me this question. Look, I'm going to answer it, and that's a level of patience that I think is a model to follow if you can.
Yeah, he is definitely. I had there's a 5 hour podcast that never got recorded between him and myself and
What?
Chris O'Toole, my co-host on Footnotes. That we went over to the Discord house, and Jason Hamacher got us into the warehouse, and we were hanging out in the warehouse. And then Ian came over, and yeah, look, just debated with me about punk stuff, and then brought us over to the house, and we did like a major hangout, and just got to unload on him on all these questions that I'd been holding for years, and then took the tourist photo on the steps with him at the end. But
That's so great.
oh, it was amazing, and just to
But I
be
think he loves it. I think he really loves it. Like he loves giving that tour of the Discord house. Like he loves showing that minor threat skateboard, and it's cool. Like it's his life. It's awesome,
and he appreciates people that want to go deep on this stuff, which is of course like my favorite thing to get to do. So it was, yeah, really fun to talk to someone that like has dedicated their life to the pursuit of what this is, and like to have that self-awareness to know to archive everything you do from an early stage, because this will be important at some point. People
That's
are going to
an
want
impressive
this.
thing. Yeah, I mean, and the fact that he's got all like his letters digitized and stuff, so he can look up. Remember, I do a lot of work for Akashic Books, and who put out the Rick book, and for the Fugazi book with Glenn Friedman for the second edition, I did an interview with Ian and Glenn, and they were trying to figure out when they first met. And Glenn was like, "Oh, I think it was, hold on, I wrote you a letter." And Ian's like, "Hold on." And he like opened up his laptop and like did a little search. And he was like, "Actually," and like he pulled up the letter that Glenn had written him in like, I don't know, 1981 or whatever it was. I was like, "This is insane." But how great, you know?
Well, yeah, to know that, like, is how many people, especially at that young age, think this matters, like what I'm doing. And I've heard it's funny because Ian at various times kind of downplays it and says, "Oh, it was never a big deal to me. It was just like about my own personal experiences." But Straight Edge, I've read in interviews that he said that he wrote it when he did Teen Idols, but was like, "I'm not going to waste this song on Teen Idols. I'm going to save it till the next band, when it's going to mean something a little bit more." And so I got to find this interview. This might just be
That's
folklore at this point,
no,
but
no. Well, I like it. I like.
yeah. And so, but like to have that awareness that like, yeah, I'm going to save this for this thing, and to have that intention with everything you do, knowing like this is going to matter. Like years from now, there's going to be some
Well,
kid looking at this.
and then the fact that it was Minor Threat was that next band, and I mean, Minor Threat, I mean, those records still sound incredible, and so Mike Hampton, who was guitar player in SOA and the Faith and stuff, he's a good friend, and he told me, he was like, it's like it didn't matter what the lineup was when Minor Threat came on, they just sounded better than everybody else. You know what I mean? It was like that was just he's like they could play better, they had better equipment, they rehearsed all the time. He said they were just better than everybody else. And those records prove it. You put the needle down and they come charging out of the speakers and you're like, man, this is a great band with like a point of view.
It's interesting because you talk to like Lou Barlow and Jay Mascis about the first Minor Threat 7 inch, and they're like, it's perfect, but it also kind of ruined hardcore because everyone wanted to sound like it
Oh
afterwards.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that was
Right.
where it got really formalized into like this genre of what is kind of hardcore. And it's true, like you talk to like Al from SSD, rest in peace, obviously, to all these people that have passed away. The that he was the first to say that Minor Threat record was like everything. Like Black Flag was what really started it, but like that Minor Threat record was just the when it got solidified,
Yeah,
and after that, everything kind of changes.
it's true. I think there was less kind of musical diversity in hardcore, or at least that's not necessarily true because like so much of those SST records are pretty crazy. Um, but it seems like that blueprint for that style of like the didn't like the what ended up sounding like Dag Nasty or whatever, it's like that kind of thing ended up being yeah, such a blueprint for so much of it, whether it was like Uniform Choice or all those in the bands that followed, but didn't, Blast was like what, Blast Flag? Like I think there seemed like there were a couple of totem poles, Uh,
Well, I saw a flyer the other day for a show that's like Soundgarden and Skin Yard, and then I can't remember who else the opening bands were. More traditional sounding hardcore bands as the opening bands, but calling it a hardcore show in
Interesting.
Seattle, like '87. This
Whoa.
so I feel like it's and also you talk. That's the thing about hardcore too, right? Like that. I think the minor threat thing is like what establishes like this is hardcore, and anyone who's kind of like coming off of that tree is calling what they're doing hardcore. But like, yeah, the guys in No Effects called what they were doing hardcore, and
Yeah.
obviously that does not sound anything like what the guys in New York were calling hardcore at the same time period.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It is funny.
I think it
And
all
yeah, the New York hardcore thing was also its own, like that. I got to say that stuff didn't sound like, like Agnostic Front or Cro-Mags or whatever. That didn't sound like DC hardcore.
yeah, it's interesting going back and listening to like those '90s records too, where a lot of them had a huge influence of hip hop coming in, a lot more sort of groove to the stuff. And then you go back and watch these videos, it's like a lot of Puerto Rican New York kids that were
Yeah.
in these bands, and it's a lot more diverse makeup of the kids at these shows than in some of the other scenes that were kind of like following the sort of more minor threat path at that time too. And so,
I mean, DC was white, 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 you know.
yeah,
I mean, sad. I mean, there were some black people on the scene, but I mean, pretty white, you know.
yeah, and so it's interesting when you get how it spreads and like adapts to local culture. I guess you see it with jazz music. You see it with all kinds of music where like local influences kind of come into what this thing is and change it and help shape it. Which I guess why all that California stuff sounds the way it does, right? Because it's so much more
Yeah.
sun baked
Right,
and
right.
it lends
Right, yeah,
itself.
or I think of like the Phoenix stuff, like Meat Puppets and things like that, like or JFA, Sun City Girls, like that stuff. That also had such a crazy. I remember hearing that stuff for the first time, and just like that first Meat Puppet 7 inch. I was like, "What is this? This is crazy," you know. Um,
Same with the Texas stuff. Like if you think like
yeah,
what's the universal thing in Texas? It's like, oh, Butthole Surfers, Big Boys,
really red.
Dicks.
I mean,
Yeah,
there were so many great bands.
but they're all like wild, like true. Like if you're gonna be out there in Texas, be a true freak because
Yeah,
it's gonna be a hard path to hoe no matter what.
yeah, yeah. It's like frontier music.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like these people are like, I'm gonna get fucked with no matter what I look like. So I'm gonna just be completely out there with what we're
Yeah.
doing.
There was actually I heard a great story, which was that I guess the first Big Boys practice, um, they weren't sure who was going to play guitar, and I don't remember if it was a coin toss or something, but it ended up being Tim. And he's like, if I had ended up playing bass and not guitar, it would have been a different sounding band. I was like, whoa, that's a crazy thought.
Yeah,
And it was literally like, I think it was a coin toss, it was something, something truly random. And I was like, what a wild thing to think the Big Boys could have been a completely different band if he had been bass player instead of guitar player.
I love to also think about the influence the big boys had on post-revolution summer era of DC stuff, and sort of like that's I don't know, maybe that I've never asked Ian about this directly, but maybe that's Ian's reaction in the same way the Meatmen were the reactionary band to Minor Threat. Ian's like, okay, my reactionary thing to what I was doing before is to be influenced by this band that was just like completely out there, completely funky, and just doing something so different. And you really see that in Fugazi. These big boys in Fugazi to me are very connected.
Yeah, and I think there's something. I think it was also just their Fugazi's embracing of like dub music and bringing in all these sort of rhythmic elements that in hardcore were just stripped away. I mean, you just can't play that fast and be that funky. you know. Uh, but it's yeah, I think there's something, and honestly, that early Fugazi period was such an incredible time to be in DC because have that be your local band that you could go see any given day was pretty amazing. And those shows were, they were small and fun and truly joyous, like it was like people were dancing, like just going off. It was a really good time. Um, Yeah, and part of it was that they brought in like all these other musical pieces that hadn't been there before, and I think that really opened people up. Like, oh man, right on, yeah, you can do this. Of course you can. You know.
Yeah, like it's a period of I don't know, it's like such a shift in underground music after Fugazi, and it's so it's so weird to think of these things happening without any sort of like mass dissemination. Like Fugazi happens, and then the reverberations are almost instantaneous, like where there's like mini Fugazis in every scene.
Fuel Ghazi.
Yeah,
Wasn't that the
was that the thing?
I think that's what they were like. I mean, I feel bad. I'm sure those guys are cool, but that was like this disparaging thing that they got like hit with. Yeah.
That's so funny because like I can remember getting into super into hot water music and someone saying like hot water fuel to me as like the way of disparaging what I got into. But I guess that's the way it goes, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And also I think it's also funny because like we're still talking about such a micro thing, you know? I mean, this is not filtering out into the greater world. This is still like some small band being influenced by like a slightly bigger band, you know?
and it's happening, I guess, through Maxim Rock and Roll and through these sort of international zines and people that are traveling around at this time and bands sort of spreading the word. But it's so organic. Like it's not like
And
seeing
like sending
something.
people demos, being like, oh, and you know, and Ian was a huge proponent of that. Like if you sent him a tape, he'd put like the Rites of Spring record on there and like or the demo that ended up becoming the 7 inch, or you know, like he would happily make a tape for you of whatever the current stuff was happening in DC, which is really awesome. You know, like so many people are so protective of that stuff, you know. And he was just like, yeah, man, send me a tape. I'll put it, you know, whatever. You should hear it. It's great.
Meeting them at different stages in my life, it's like that thing of never meeting your heroes. And it hasn't always gone well, my interactions with Ian over the years, but not no fault of his own all the time either. But like it has always lived up to the epicness that it should have because I think he, like you're saying, he would make the people these tapes. Like he brought took that burden on. Like he wasn't taking this as an opportunity to sort of advance his life or go for the personal gratification. Like,
Now he's sharing the thing that he's into.
yeah, as big as Fugazi got, it never seems like it was a fun band to be in.
Really?
Well, like, you know, like the shows are fun and the performance are cathartic, but it probably is a lot of practice. And like they're eating like beans
Yeah, but
out
those
of
guys are
cans.
funny. Those guys
Yeah,
are all funny.
they're very funny. Actually,
I bet
I've
there's
only
a
met a
lot
few
of
of them.
laughs. I bet there's a lot of laughs.
Yeah, I'm sure there's laughs, but it just doesn't seem like there's like the release valves of, and maybe because I've sold out straight edge, this is my only my myopic way of looking at it, but I'm like, no one's smoking weed, no one's just like kicking back and like just letting it's like it's just very intense. Like people are moshing at the shows. You're like, do we have the currency to give this person back their $5 in the correct currency at this show? Like you need to be prepared for these
Right.
situations.
Sir, we're out of lira currently. Do you accept zlotys?
My favorite conspiracy theory is that they brought the asshole that started the mosh pit on tour with them. Like it was like a roadie, and it's like, okay, you know what to do.
That I love that. That's really, really great. Like he's a plant.
There's that one, and then there's also the one that seems to exist. There's like a guy in Guelph that had this story that ran a record store that, oh yeah, like I smoked weed with Ian one time. There's always like the one guy in the
Yeah,
town that claims
yeah.
that they
You're
were
like,
the one.
you did, huh? Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's more into like sensibility than he is.
Yeah, yeah, he's not gonna smoke sativa, man. You know, he's not that kind of dude. But he is definitely yeah, he's never coming on this show unfortunately, but that's fine.
Why not? He
I
turned out a punk.
yeah, I know. I definitely and I wrote him a letter. I got told to write him a letter to do it. Like not a letter, an email. But I think it's cuz I'm not the biggest Fugazi fan.
He doesn't care about that.
I think I think it maybe the way I've said it he interprets as being disrespectful. I
No.
also have some friends that have recently run afoul with him on zine and podcast appearances that he's made. So Yeah, like I feel like he's probably looking at my podcast. He's like, I don't need that bullshit. I don't. He's like, I had that kid in my house for 4 fucking hours.
You're selling yourself short. I think it'd be great. I think it would be a really awesome. You should totally do it.
Well, if he, believe me, I'm not the holdout. I think there's another person involved in the equation, sadly. But I I wanted to. I've talked to you forever, but I do want to talk to you about this unbelievable book that you've put out or been involved in putting together, which is this book kind of documenting Rick's work, and it's Plenty for All: The Art of Rick Fröberg, and it is truly an unbelievable book documenting a unbelievable artist. Um, I guess outside of the fact that his work had to be documented, where did the idea first come about to do it?
Well, it was actually sadly at a memorial for him in New York. So he died coming up in June. It will be a couple years. But it was at his memorial here, and Rich Jacobs, who also sadly has since died, came up to me and was like, we should do a book of Rick's art. And I was like, absolutely, that sounds great. And Johnny Temple, who plays in Girls Against Boys and who runs Akashic Books, was also a friend of Rick's. He was at the memorial. And we just kind of went up to Johnny and we're like, Johnny, man, what do you think? We should, would you be up for doing a book of Rick's art? And he was like, I'm in. And so then it was a matter of just figuring out how we could get all the material because we just didn't know what was out there. I mean, Rick was like not good about documenting stuff and keeping track of, what commissions he had done or, he just was not that guy. And so we just sort of put a word out through friends and asked, do you have original pieces of Rick's? Is there anything of his that you've seen or know somebody that might have that would be willing to contribute, take a photograph or scan it or whatever. And so we just started to amass a remarkable amount of work, like way more than I realized. Like you know, I was in a band with that guy for 10 years. We were friends for a long time, and I had no idea how much work he had made. It was stunning. And then not only just how much work, but how many different kinds of, mediums that he was working with and experimenting with. And so then we just basically had like stacks of stuff and we printed a bunch of it out, and Rich would come over to my apartment and we'd like make stacks on my dining room table of like, all right, here are ink drawings, here are paintings, here are, and we want to make sure we represented everything fairly. We didn't want to be too heavy on one thing or another. And he's, I think, fairly known for a lot of the stuff that he's done for his own bands or for other bands, and we want to make sure that stuff was in there, obviously, but we didn't want it to be just like his rock and roll art, because he truly is, was a fine artist. Even though he never went to art school, he's largely self-taught. And so we basically just tried to figure out how to, how to organize it and, how we were going to try to present it. And at one point we thought we'll do it chronologically, but then that seemed kind of weird because it seemed like it would be like clusters of work, and instead I thought, well, it'd be cool if also wanted to make sure that everything got represented. If we do his ink drawings, if we do his paintings, if we do etchings, watercolors, and like all the, he blew glass, he did all kinds of stuff. And so we just try to organize it that way and just kind of whittled through everything. And I think there's like 400 and something images in the book. And that was culled from easily 3 times that amount.
Wow.
So yeah.
It's I knew he was obviously an incredible artist from seeing his artwork show up on different bands' records and just different places over the years, but I feel like he never really branded himself the artist in that way that like some punk artists have, and sort of like built up this sort of like brand as being a fine artist in the way that
Right.
like
No, he didn't. I no, I think he was, like he liked Pusshead or whatever, but I don't think he didn't, I don't think he wanted to, he was such an unpretentious guy that I think he was kind of loath to refer to himself as a fine artist. I think he also, he was really like Ian, like some of these people we're talking about, he was very much about the work. And so he liked to think of himself as an illustrator, as sort of available for hire. So anybody could hire him, and he would do the work. He was committed to it. He wouldn't turn in crappy work. It didn't matter if he was into your thing or not. If you hired him, he'd do it. And so I think he thought of himself more in that regard, like sort of more workmanlike and less of kind of the austere fine artist. you know.
It's almost more like an Albini approach than
Yeah,
Ian McKaye approach, because I think Ian McKaye's always very consistent in contributing to the brand in that way. Not that he would ever want. This is probably why he's not going to come on the show, because I say shit like that.
Ian, I'd like to talk to you about your brand.
Yeah. But I think, like you're saying, like he would do it like Albini does, where it's like, I'm going to do the best work I can for whatever the
Totally.
project requires.
If he had overalls, he would have put them on. you know. Yeah, and it really there was stuff that, for example, there's a couple things I don't think are in the book, but there was like a band that I know he was doing work for that he liked the people in the band, but it was a bigger band and they had management, and he ended up just having to deal with the management. And we'd meet up for a beer and stuff, and he's like, "Oh my God," he's like, "I can't believe this. This is so stupid." It's like the management wants this change and that change, and he's like, "If I just email the guys in the band, it would be done in 5 minutes." But again, he was being paid. He took it seriously, and the quality of the work was good. It didn't matter that he was frustrated and the process was not what he wanted it to be. He was just like, "This is what you hired me to do. I'm doing it."
Yeah, there's something like it's weird when you get into that level of things and you're still coming from the punk world and you have this connection to the person through the punk world, and you're like, why can't I just write to them? Like, why do there
Yeah.
have to be so many levels of bureaucracy between us? But that's kind of, I guess, the reality once you get outside of this bubble we're from.
Yeah, I think it's a weird thing, particularly in the music biz. There's so much of it, right? And I think in the art world too, which is I think why he also didn't really want to participate in the quote unquote art world. He'd rather have friends put together group shows in like a small gallery or whatever. There was a really cool bar in Barcelona where he had a great exhibit of a bunch of his drawings, and that was way more his speed. Like, yeah, come and look at my work, and we'll all drink a bunch of beers and chit chat. uh
And he also, and like I met him a handful of times, so I'm not going to pretend like I really knew him, but he just seems too punk to have ever been that fine artist. Because, and I don't mean to throw disparaging remarks towards any of the artists that we've talked about on this episode, but there is this sort of like level of arrogance armor that you have to wear as a fine artist to believe that your doodles are somehow worth millions and billions of dollars, and that you're somehow above anyone else who could do this kind of work. And that's why, like, I don't know, like this is just my interactions with some of these people, whereas I don't know, Rick always just came off as like the most down to earth normal human being
yeah,
imaginable.
he was incredibly down to earth, insightful, thoughtful, generous person. And I think he knew that his work was good, but I don't think he was the kind of person to put a value on that somehow made it worth more than somebody else's work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, I said to him at one point, "Man, you should get somebody to represent you, to like, you should be making a living off your art." And he was like, "I don't want to deal with those people." And which stinks, because it meant that there were times where he was struggling financially, when I was like, "You don't have to be, like your work, people will pay for it." But so it goes.
It it's also, um, not to get too sad right now, but Rick, Rich, O, and Dave Sweetapple all passing
Yeah,
away at the same time. It was all these giants amongst people that were
yeah.
great human beings, and it was so sad, but it just seemed to happen all
And
really.
real connectors, real people who, again, were like had very long arms, and they were in contact with lots of different people around the world, and the kind of people that if you met them and that was the connection, you were in, and they were good people. You knew that. And yeah, those are real losses, real losses.
Yeah. Um,
But I think it's on us to continue. That's the thing. That's the one thing I do think that it's our responsibility to carry that forward.
and also the legacies these people have left behind and the worlds they touched and helped cultivate in their presences, and that's like the I guess that's the true gift of being involved in this thing, is if you can leave it better than you came to it and connect it more than it was connected before you got involved in it. Like
Absolutely.
that's why we're doing it.
And I think like from Rich, like I like a sense of kindness, to bring kindness into the world, and from Rick, like a free spiritedness, just to sort of like winking in the eye of the abyss.
Yeah. And I feel like, oh, there's a humbleness that and Sweet Apple, there's a wonderful insanity that and I think you'd be very happy if I said that. But yeah, you're right. Like there's lessons I took from all these people, and I'm very lucky to have gotten to meet them at different stages, and yeah, carry like you're saying, carry them with them the whole
Well, and
time.
I think that's what, for those of us who are left, that's what we do, right? That's what you gotta take the good parts and push those forward, because that's how they live on, and as well they deserve to be remembered.
Well, this book is truly an amazing tribute to Rick and all
Thank
his
you.
work, and
It was really fun to put together. It was great to work with Rich. We got really close working on that book together, and it was also, for me, it was really cathartic, because while I was working on it, I was having like little mini conversations with Rick in my head. Uh, because like I would be like, man, would he want these two images across from each other on the page, or would he just be like, this is the dumbest? I was just trying to imagine, like, what would Rick think? Then it'd be like, it doesn't matter what Rick thinks, he's not here. And knowing that he would also laugh at that, and
that'd be
so
amazing.
yeah, I mean, I wish he were here to see that book and to see how amazingly people have responded to it. But yeah, I'm glad it's out there. And honestly, maybe it's the first of many. I don't know. He has so much work. Uh, I mean, there could be a whole book just on like T-shirts that he designed for bands.
It it would be amazing if there was like a Rich and Rick show that toured,
Yeah,
because
that's a really neat idea.
they're both impactful artists in very different kind of worlds, but like very obviously connected through friendship and through punk and
Well, and Rich actually had Rick in a bunch of his group shows. I would say the majority of Rick's exhibitions were in Rich's group shows. So, it would actually make a lot of sense.
well, hopefully it shows up here at the AGO in Toronto, so I get a chance to see it when it happens.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
This has been amazing, and anytime you want to come back on this show and talk about anything, you are always welcome.
Right on. Next time we'll be on with Ian. I hope you I'm gonna text the dude right now. Be like, hey man,